Zelda Invades Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151 Hot News. Coulson scared away all the citizens who lost their homes. Thank you. Although Link knew that those people were emotionally broken down by the double dilemma of disaster and losing their homes, it was understandable. But since Coulson had already stepped in and drove them away viciously, Link naturally couldn't say something like, "Phil, don't do these are all poor people." Self-deprecating and beautiful words. He was a good person and pushed Coulson to the position of the villain. Coulson shook his head and smiled. "This is what I should do. I think S.H.I.E.L.D. should reward me for this." Link asked, "Why?" Coulson said, "It's the same reason as driving away the troublemakers who graffitied on the nuclear bomb. I'm protecting world peace." Then Coulson joked with a serious meaning, "What if your Earthlings are disappointed and want to destroy the Earth? No one can stop this." Zelda stepped forward and explained seriously, "Link won't be like this. His strength comes from his kind heart." Zelda doesn't like others to misunderstand Link. The other agents who were rescued by Link also stepped forward to thank him, and their tone was surprisingly polite. The longer he spent with Link, the more he could feel his strange temperament emanating from inside and out. Coulson turned around and looked at the large doomsday-like sea of fire behind him and couldn't help but smile bitterly. It's okay for all kinds of strange monsters to appear, but how come even the geology has begun to change? Is there a hellfire hidden under New York? This can explain why there are so many disasters in New York, because it is closest to hell. It really makes Coulson feel incredible that he can run out in this environment. He muttered in his heart, "What should I do? I seem to be a fan of Link. Then what about my favorite captain? I'm so worried." Link, Zelda and others came to the sea of fire in the scorching heat. Link's body released a lot of cold air, which resisted the surrounding heat, making a white mist wherever he passed. Worried that the ground would tear again, the two princesses held Link's left and right hands. Zelda's bird was circling in the hot sky, recording with its video function, and its body was baked hot. Based on the information sent by the bird, Zelda said, "This sea of fire is about the size of 3 football fields. Because it is covered by magma, it is unclear how deep this magma pool is." Link said, "If you have the heat insulating suits of the Gideon tribe, you can jump into the magma to check it out." Princess Washan hesitated and said, "Even if you have it, there is no need to jump in." Suddenly, the magma sea of fire gurgled, and a few bubbles emerged, and then a dozen flaming bats appeared, flapping their wings and flying forward. Princess Washan extended her sword blade and stirred it. A long and sharp sword energy crushed and exploded the flaming bats as they flew up. The explosion caused the magma to churn, and even splashed 2 drops at Link's feet, which quickly solidified into 2 small black stones. Zelda was full of worry. "This large magma pool, I feel the strong power of Ganon Curse. I can feel that Ganon Curse is constantly hatching new monsters through this pool." Link nodded and said, "Let's leave." Tony was busy doing experiments. At this time, Jarvis said calmly, "Sir, Princess Zelda sent a video. I think you will be very interested." Tony was a little impatient. "Please play it. I hope this video can provide me with some inspiration for the split Iron Man." He frowned and raised his head. When he saw the video played by Jarvis, his mouth twitched immediately. A remote civilian residential area in New York collapsed into a huge pit. The inside was like hot sauce, steaming magma that distorted the air. At the edge of the pit, there were 3 blonde boys and girls. Just by looking at the standing posture of the one in the middle, Tony immediately recognized Link and the others. Tony rubbed his temples. "Link, what happened to you again?" At this time, Pepper had just arrived at the underground laboratory. She subconsciously came to Tony's old house not long ago and found that Lippy Papa was doing aerobics alone in the living room following the TV, twisting her buttocks. When she heard the sound, she suddenly turned around and looked at Pepper. Both of them were embarrassed. Pepper said sorry for disturbing her and left quickly. When she entered the basement, she saw a sea of fire on the screen at first glance and couldn't help saying, "Tony, New York's housing prices will definitely collapse. Why don't we consider buying at the bottom?" Natasha and Hawkeye were on a mission, pretending to be a couple, and drinking coffee on the street. The waiter glared at Hawkeye with some sour eyes, not knowing how this wrinkled guy hooked up with such a beautiful girl. Suddenly, the two received a message at the same time, which was sent by Carlson. Looking at the picture sent from the mobile phone, the two looked at each other in silence. Hawkeye said, "You said Link has encountered too many troubles?" Natasha said angrily, "I asked Link to do this. It's not that Link has encountered too many troubles, but that our shield has caused him too many troubles." Hawkeye thought for a while and said, "That's right." After Nick learned about this, he rushed to the scene quickly. Link and his friends were waiting not far away. Link was bored and bought some meat and mushrooms. He controlled a few plates, put the food on them, and floated them on the magma to bake with hot air. Zelda distributed the baked food to everyone. The agents, who were severely frightened, gnawed the food tremblingly. They walked against the heat wave, but when they got near Link, the temperature suddenly cooled down, just like getting into a refrigerator. Carlson, with gauze wrapped all over his face, handed Nick a bunch of roasted mushrooms. He was in a very good mood now, because he had just thought clearly about something very important. Why do you have to worry about whether to be a fan of Tony or Link? I can just be a fan of both. Nick took the mushroom skewers, sat next to Link, and said sullenly, "So, New York is completely hopeless? I have arranged for people to isolate here, but many people still saw it. Now the news is everywhere saying that the New York volcano has erupted and the country is finished. Well, what should we do?" But now in New York, the temperature has risen by 5 degrees. The Pentagon has gathered experts to discuss how to deal with this situation. The military wants to directly put 2 bombs on people to divert the Atlantic Ocean seawater into the magma sea to cool it down. But the relevant professionals immediately stopped it. No one knew what the consequences of doing so would be. The focus of the world, which had just cooled down from the New York War, suddenly focused on New York again. Chapter 152. The house was bombed. Zelda's bird had been hovering in the hot sky to collect information, but even with a powerful bird, it would take a day to get the results, so Link and the others left first. A video of Carlson firing a gun to drive away the blind began to circulate on the internet, and the calm Link in the video became the focus of attention. Carlson seemed to be really angry and ordered all the media that had discredited Link in this incident to delete the news. Overnight, all the negative news about Link disappeared and was clarified. Although Carlson rarely got angry and looked like a good guy, he had a high status in SHIELD. If Nick disappeared or died unexpectedly, Carlson would be the director of SHIELD in an emergency. Tony called Link to ask about the specifics, but Link himself was also confused, only knowing that there was a large amount of Ganon cursed power in the magma sea of fire. The specific situation must wait for the test results of the bird to come out. Link returned to Stark Tower and took a look. The super huge diamond that he threw in the lobby was restored to its original state and placed there, forming a landscape. Previously, the company's employees and partners often took photos with this huge gem, but due to the New York War, New York as a whole looked much more dilapidated and lifeless. Then Link settled Zelda and Princess Washang in the hotel and put on his coat and wandered outside. Called Happy. "It's Link. I'm tracking that sneaky subordinate of Killian. The situation is urgent now. I won't say any more." Happy's voice came from the receiver. Link hurriedly shouted, "Wait. Don't act rashly. Tell me the location." I'm a bang. There was an explosion sound, not only in the receiver, but also in Link's other ear, so he followed the source of the sound, summoned his wings directly, and sprinted over quickly. A street was full of messy flames. There were many injured pedestrians around, including Happy. Link looked left and right, but couldn't find Killian's subordinate. Link hurriedly contacted Carlson, and in less than 2 minutes, the ambulance arrived quickly. Link sent Happy to the car, looked at the mess around, and thought to himself, "It's the fire again." Link told Tony what happened. Tony was silent on the other end of the phone, and no one knew what he was thinking. Link said, "Happy is not in danger of life, he is just in a coma, and he will wake up." Tony said, "Okay, I understand." Tony went to the hospital in New York overnight. Seeing Happy covered with bruises, Tony was silent for a long time. Zelda comforted Tony. He will be fine. Tony nodded. Tony looked up at the lights in the hospital and said, we are not professionals. It is useless to stand here. Everyone has their own division of labor. Let's go. I'll go see what the magma sea of fire really looks like. New York is much warmer thanks to it. Tony smiled and said, I'll go first. You can leave later. Otherwise, those rude reporters will squeeze you like pickles. Looking at Tony's back, Zelda said, Tony is very angry. As soon as Tony walked out of the hospital, the reporters pounced on him like bloodthirsty jackals. Then a male reporter who was filming with a mobile phone said something that seemed to completely anger Tony. Tony took off his sunglasses, revealing his eyes that had become like black oil due to fatigue and anger. I have a little holiday greeting. I just organized the words. My name is Tony Stark. I'm not afraid of you. I tell you, you are dead. I will collect your body. This has nothing to do with the Pentagon, nothing to do with ZZ. It's just a cliché revenge about you and me. If you are a man, this is my home address. 10,880, Malibu, zip code 90,265. I'm waiting for you. Tony grabbed the phone that was rudely placed under his nose, threw it to the ground, and said, I will take the blame. He drove away immediately. The reporters were in a panic. Zelda saw it clearly and suddenly frowned. Why do I feel something is wrong? Tony was indeed very angry and drove the car directly to the edge of the magma sea of fire, staring at the magma pool as big as 3 football fields with wide eyes. Tears flowed from the heat, and then a cold air enveloped Tony's body, and Link and the other two came over. Zelda said, if you don't want to get poisoned by inhaling too much sulfide, you'd better stay away from here. Tony turned around and said, didn't you play here for a day? Link said, we are aliens, and our physical fitness is much better than yours. Have you forgotten that you fell after the war? Link threw several nuclear bombs into the space vortex, and his body was contaminated with some nuclear radiation. Link himself was fine, but Tony, who had the worst physical fitness among the Avengers, fell ill. Then let's leave. Vertibird was still circling in the sky diligently and collecting information. Tony instructed Zelda like a master. Vertibird's detection device is not the most advanced. For special environments like this, special detection devices should be made. Let's go home and do it. So the few of them returned to California. While Tony was waiting for the Mandarin to come to him, he was developing a high temperature resistant detection device. And Link was busy at home getting familiar with the ice maker skills. No matter what is in the sea of magma, whether it is all on or Ganon's minions, Link must be prepared to deal with high temperature combat. Carlson sent him several messages in succession. It is said that it is a sea of magma, and many monsters of fire elements suddenly appeared. An army must be stationed near the magma pool for a long time to prevent the monsters of the sea of magma from spreading to other areas. Bad news also kept coming. There were terrorist attacks, and a large area of the city collapsed, full of magma. Even as strong as New York citizens, they could not withstand a series of disasters. When Tony was closely investigating the intelligence of the Mandarin organization, Pepper and Maya came here. Because of Maya's matter, Pepper was arguing with Tony, and Maya suddenly interrupted the two, pointed at the TV and said, look. Only to see a missile on the screen bombed a beach villa. Tony was startled, and he hurriedly looked out the window, but found nothing. Before he could breathe a sigh of relief, Tony's face turned pale. I did something stupid. Tony is careless about his life, and Pepper is responsible for everything. Even his home address, he only remembered it after living there for more than 10 years. When facing the reporters, Tony made a slip of the tongue. That is, the address he reported to the global media was the address of his old house, where Link lives now. Bang! The missile blew up half of the old house. Haha, I have been preparing for this plot for a long time. Thanks to Lily Shooping for supporting 2300 starting coins. Minecrafter for supporting 500 starting coins. Chapter 153, Counterattack. Third update. Link was at home, playing with Pepper. Pepper was holding the little master sword that Zelda made for him, fighting Link, while Link took a fork. Pepper was now wearing a beautiful princess dress, with a fluffy skirt, which looked particularly funny on the green Pepper. But unexpectedly, Pepper liked it very much. Link's other hand was practicing to make ice cubes of various shapes, to increase his control ability. Beside him, there were a lot of ice sculptures, such as Thor's hammer, Iron Man suit, Roger's, and Tony in beach pants, mushroom skewers made by Zelda, and the rapier of the unparalleled princess. From the initial roughness to the later exquisiteness, and Link's diligent practice, the ability to control ice increased rapidly. The unparalleled princess supported her chin with both hands, watching Link and Peppa playing, while Zelda sat aside, checking the electronic log left by Tony, to repair the solution to the control failure of the bird due to long-term high temperature. Peppa suddenly looked behind Link and babbled, brave master, a plump bird is flying over here. But, Puffy, there shouldn't be such creatures on Earth missiles. Zelda looked up and shouted. When Link turned around, he saw the missile smashing through the glass, rushing to his feet, and then exploding. What's going on? Link summoned Darkle and hurriedly hugged Zelda, Princess Washian, and Peppa, using his back to block the impact of the explosion. Darkle's all-round attack rebounded. The impact of the missile explosion was directly refracted to the entire residential area. Zelda screamed. I said something was wrong. Tony reported the address in front of the reporters was here. The flames enveloped the 4 people. Tony stared blankly at his old house on TV, being blown up with flames. Tony rubbed his brows in regret. Link, I'm sorry. Jarvis. The battle suit that stopped in the middle of the living room suddenly disintegrated and was worn by Tony. Jarvis warned, this suit is still in the experimental state. Tony said, don't worry about it. My friend is taking the bombing for me. He broke through the glass and rushed out. Peppa and Tony's ex-girlfriend Maya were left behind. Maya looked unbelievable. Could it be that Tony reported someone else's address that day? Peppa covered her face. She was very embarrassed. That's right. May God bless Link, the 2 Zeldas and Peppa. What a wicked thing Tony did. One shell exploded, and another one flew over immediately. Link, facing the smoke, jumped up and used a shield to deflect the flying missile shield back, and directly overturned the helicopter. Link shouted to Zelda, go and see how Epona is doing. Then Link jumped up and jumped onto the broken roof of his house. Looking at 5 or 6 helicopters with bad intentions facing him, Link was furious, playing with Peppa at home peacefully, and didn't cause any trouble. Suddenly, a missile blew up the house. Link was furious. A helicopter started to shoot at Link with a machine gun. Link used the skills he had just learned to build an ice wall in front of him. The bullets hit the ice wall densely and got stuck in it. Then the ice wall was disintegrated by Link himself, and the ice wall broke, revealing Link holding a bow and arrow behind him. Bang! Link shot an arrow, and with a rustling sound, the arrow directly penetrated the front glass of the helicopter and pierced the pilot's brain. Immediately, the helicopter began to turn upside down and circled and crashed into the house. Link used a vertical sword energy from bottom to top, splitting the helicopter in half and falling into the sea. But then, 2 missiles were fired at the same time. Tap! Another shield counter, returning the hot missile to its original owner, blowing up a helicopter. The second missile, Link dodged, quickly used misting to bind it, and with a force, made a circle, and threw it back to the helicopter. The helicopter hurriedly moved to dodge, but it hit the one next to it. The propellers of the 2 helicopters collided, and fell into the sea. Link looked at the sky, and saw many helicopters from news media, all coming to join in the fun. But this made it difficult for Link to tell which was the enemy and which was the onlookers. All irrelevant personnel, leave now. Tony activated the loudspeaker function in Iron Man, and the voice was so loud that it seemed that the entire Pacific Ocean could hear it. This sentence was not enough to make the reporters who regarded news as their life leave, but Tony immediately shouted, if you don't leave here quickly, I will attack indiscriminately. 5, 4, 3, 2. The helicopters of the media fled one after another. A black helicopter suddenly opened fire, launched 2 missiles at the same time, and then turned around and ran away. Link took the opportunity to use a sword energy to dig away the missile flying in the air, and the air wave rolled out, making Link's hair stand up. Let me do this one. Tony hurriedly released lasers with both hands to detonate another missile. Tony came to Link, feeling more embarrassed than ever. Tony took off his armor and said, I'm sorry. I sincerely apologize to you. You took the blast for me. Link smiled bitterly and shook his head. Seeing Link's confused look, but not blaming him, Tony, who had a strong sense of responsibility, felt even more pain. He turned back to look at the escaping plane and immediately said, I want to capture that man alive. I'm going to chase him first. Then the thrusters on his limbs started at the same time, and he rushed angrily towards the helicopter that ran away. Link looked at the ruins in front of him and nodded. He hadn't eaten lunch yet. He didn't know if the kitchen was bombed. But now, Link jumped down from the house first and ran to the stable where Epona was. Peppa shouted, my brave man, Zyongbaba is fine. Ever since Peppa was bitten by Epona, he started calling Epona Zyongbaba. She often dares to challenge Epona, but Epona seems to like Peppa very much. After all, she looks like a big carrot and treats Peppa's provocation as a game. Epona's stable was enlarged by Link, and now it looks more like a house. Link is very good at training horses, and Epona will not run away, even if she is not tied with a rope. The only disadvantage is that sometimes she will run to the living room to play with Link, which scares Peppa to death. Are you okay, Epona? Link patted Epona's face lovingly and looked at the roof of the stable collapsed by the explosion, and was a little scared. Zelda and others were by his side, and even if the nuclear bomb exploded, Link could guarantee their safety. But Link was too busy to deal with Epona. Fortunately she was fine. Chapter 154 Small Town. 4th update. Epona raised her head proudly, snorted, and tapped the ground with her hooves twice. She said that she would not be scared by such a small thing, and then her attention was attracted by Peppa who was hiding behind Link. Peppa was still swinging the wooden sword in his hand. Don't come over here. If you come over here, I will hit you. Peppa and Maya hurried over. Seeing that Link, Zelda and others were safe, they were relieved and apologized to Link again for Tony's reckless behavior. Maya looked at Link curiously. Are you Link? The elf Link whose whole body glows and can go to the sky and into the earth. No, it's Link, the son of God. Link, huh? Zelda whispered. Link, you may not know that your nickname has changed again recently. It's called Son of God. Nickname? Although Link didn't like people calling him nicknames, these names were at least complimenting, which was better than having ears. But what Link didn't know was that the nickname Son of God was secretly spread by Carlson, but that's another story. Maya was a little suspicious of Link's identity. After all, Dr. Killian's extremis virus would also cause the same effect, with the whole body glowing, and the strength doubled. So Maya was thinking whether Link had anything to do with the extremis virus. Of course, it's dinner time now, so Link's current priority is to eat. After the fight just now, Link is even hungrier. Zelda and Princess Washan came to the kitchen and found that other places were destroyed, but the kitchen was miraculously intact. So in order to comfort Link who was inexplicably bombed, the two Zeldas carefully prepared a large table of delicious food for Link. They ate outdoors, facing the smell of gunpowder and the sea breeze. Tony went to chase that helicopter. Why hasn't he come back after so long? Peppa was a little worried. Peppa came up and imitated Captain America, comforting him. Tony is an outstanding warrior. He will return safely. Hearing Peppa speaking stiff English, Peppa smiled and touched Peppa's two tentacles. Looking at Peppa's cute appearance, she thought to herself, Tony is always talking nonsense. Peppa is just a little angel. How can he be naughty? Because of his bad mood, Link's appetite increased by 30%. Peppa asked Link curiously how he could eat so much and not get fat. Link thought about it and said, I think he exercises a lot. Zelda said depressedly, he was born with it. In fact, Zelda had something difficult to say. She and Princess Washan had the same weight, but Princess Washan was half a head taller than her. But after waiting for a long time, Tony didn't come back, and Peppa started to get anxious. Several people watched the construction team clean up the site, holding parasols, chairs, tables, and drinks, watching the waves gradually swallow up the sun, but Tony never came back. Zelda couldn't contact him even with Jarvis. Peppa became more and more uneasy. Link said, well, I'll go find Tony. I know where he is. Link thought about it and thought it might be because of Tony's unreliable MK42, which Tony called the prodigal. He recalled the place where Tony fell and prepared to look for it. Before leaving, Link asked Princess Washang to protect Pepper and Maya, because according to the development of the original plot, Pepper will be caught soon. Link did not take the plane, but flew across the sea with his wings, wearing the functional glasses given by Zelda to detect Tony's location. He soon came to a small town covered in ice and snow. He couldn't help laughing and said, "It's here." The world line will indeed make a wonderful conclusion. Tony still fell in the town, where he met the boy Harry by chance. With the help of Harry and the training in the town, Tony got rid of the constraints of Iron Man. Following his memory, Link came to a house. The garage looked familiar, so Link landed and knocked on the door. "Is anyone there?" After a while, the door opened, and a pair of eyes were peeking at Link. Seeing Link's appearance clearly, Link smiled at him. Pop. Harry quickly closed the door. "Link. Do I look so fierce?" Link knocked on the door again and shouted, "I'm Tony's friend. I know Tony has been here." Harry said, "No, you are Iron Man's enemy. The news said that you were in Iron Man's house and killed Iron Man with the Mandarin's fighter plane." "What kind of news?" Link said, "Don't trust the news." Harry shouted through the door, "Don't trust your words either." Link put his hands on his hips. "Did I kill Iron Man?" Harry, "No. He stayed at my house." Link, "That's it. Open the door quickly." Harry opened the door carefully and invited Link in. Link looked at the messy garage, which was similar to Tony's laboratory. On the sofa lay a dead MK-42. Little Harry brought 2 sandwiches and handed one to Link. "Eat it." Tony said it was good. Link wanted to say he was not hungry, but he took the food and ate quietly with little Harry. "Where's Tony?" He went out to search for intelligence. Harry looked at Link with his bear-like eyes. Seeing Link wearing a very thin coat, he asked, "You are the second guest of this garage. You are more pitiful than Tony. At least he has a blanket. Aren't you cold?" Link smiled and said, "I'm not afraid of the cold." After mastering the ice maker skill, Link would not feel how cold it was even in the severe cold of Jotunheim. After knowing that Tony was not there, Link said goodbye to Harry, because Link was about to encounter a danger. This was Tony's first battle without a battlesuit. It was very dangerous. Harry suddenly asked curiously, "Can you really fly?" Link nodded, spread his wings, and flew into the sky. At this time, Tony was talking to a poor woman who lost her child because of the Mandarin terrorist incident. As they were talking, a uniformed woman suddenly rushed up and grabbed Tony, leaving Tony's face pressed against the not so clean sticky table of a small bar. A police officer who happened to be there shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" The uniformed woman smiled and said, "I'm investigating a case and arresting people." "You are the sheriff here, right?" The police officer said, "Yes, you are." The uniformed woman said, "I'm from the Department of Homeland Security." But obviously the alert sheriff did not relax his vigilance. Tony quickly winked at the lost woman. The woman immediately quietly threw the information under the table. "Why do I have muscle aches when I get sick?" Today's 5th update will be released later. Everyone should go to bed early and pay attention to your health. Thanks to Zyanatang 246,100 Kidian coins for support. Chapter 155 Ice and Fire. 5th update. When Link arrived at the store that caused the panic, Tony had already used a microwave and natural gas to blow up the desperate virus woman into the sky, and she was hanging pitifully on the power line. Tony turned his head and saw the bald man with an evil smile trying to melt the water tank with his hands, so that a small flood would occur in this northern city covered in ice and snow. But Tony calmly put his hands on his waist. "Mr. Flame Man, can you tell me what you are doing?" The bald man sneered. "You want to take a cold shower?" Tony shook his head. "Oh no, I'm sweating all over now. I'm already very cold. Especially when the man behind you appears. I'm even colder." "Mr. Flame Man, please allow me to introduce my friend, Mr. Rice Man." The bald man hurriedly turned around, but saw nothing, and shouted, "Where is the person? Are you kidding me? I'm here." Link kicked the Flame Man away, rubbing against the ground and creating a long spark. Tony looked at his pink limited edition watch and said, 11:21. It's been less than 6 hours since we last met. I really missed you. By the way, aren't you cold? Link, can you tell me how you came to this small city? Tony put his hands on his hips and looked around. Of course I came to find evidence. And by the way, I charged my prodigal suit. There was a very generous boy who lent me his home electricity. When the MK42 is fully charged, his family may go bankrupt. The bald man stood up at this moment, and the surface of his body was a kind of orange-red color that felt particularly delicious. From Link's perspective, his eyes were red, and he stared at Link. I know you, Link. You always appear in the news. Tony said, even if you are his fan, Link will never tolerate you mocking Link for being short in public. Link is horrible when he is angry, and there are aliens to testify for him. Link looked at Tony in surprise. Tony often talks a lot of nonsense, and at this time, his mouth never stopped for a moment. The chattering should be an external manifestation of fear. After all, Tony's pitiful sense of security all depends on Iron Man. And his prodigal son MK42 is just an unreliable child. Tony was so emotional when he saw his closest friend Link appear in such a dangerous situation. The bald man rushed over quickly, and his burning fists hit Link fiercely. It was the easiest for Link to deal with such a reckless move that only knew how to fight and fight. He dodged it sideways. Then the Master Sword stretched out, and with a swipe, he cut off the bald man's arm. Like a pool of magma, it was soft and sticky on the ground. Link wanted to cut off the bald man's head and turn him into a headless man. But he changed his mind temporarily and wanted to see the effect of the desperate virus. Just like a worm, the bald man's arm returned to normal and rushed over again. He must have never practiced special fighting skills, so he was pinned to the ground by Link in an instant. The bald man laughed and began to burn. His body became even redder, and Link's sleeves began to burn. I will cremate your arm in advance. Really? Link said softly. The high temperature of the bald man's body seemed unable to hurt Link. The slender white hand, with 5 fingers tightly clasped the bald man's chest. Although it was still smoking, it was still intact. Link said, Tony, what will happen if you continue to heat up? Tony shouted, what are you doing? It will explode. Link said, I will cool him down. The palm released a lot of cold air, and the bald man's body, which was like magma, cooled down instantly. Tony hurriedly moved away. No, no, no. The heat in his body cannot be dissipated. It will. The bald man's face was one side, and his facial features released strong light, and Link exerted force with his hand, forcing the bald man to break the asphalt of the road, and then blocked it with the Hylian shield. Bang! The ground emitted a wave, and the surrounding asphalt stood up and cracked. Tony came over at ease, looked at the scene Link had created, and couldn't help but wink. Not suitable for children. Do you think this kind of flaming man is related to the big fire pit in New York? Link shook his head. No way. Tony came up and hugged Link, thanking him sincerely. You came just in time. I owe you another life. Link shook his head. It's nothing. It's really nothing. After all, Goddess Hylia didn't give out any rewards. Link pointed to the woman in the sky. Didn't you beat her up into the sky? Even if you don't wear Iron Man, you're still amazing. Tony smiled and said, then I'll accept your compliment. We should set off. Do you have a cell phone with you? Link gave Tony the latest smartphone. He had no interest in technology products, but Zelda often replaced his communication equipment and motorcycle for him. Of course, he also often bought these electronic devices for Princess Washang. But Princess Washang was different from Zelda and Link. This dignified girl was not as adaptable to modern technology as Zelda and Link. I still don't know how to input text on the notebook. Tony called Roddy, who was on a mission in Sixstan. After asking Roddy for his account and password, he contacted Zelda to help find the address of the Mandarin. At this time, because of Link's words, the Washang princess has been guarding Pepper and Maya. Zelda told Tony what she learned from Maya, that Killian was the Mandarin's partner. Pepper couldn't help but talk on the phone with Tony for a while. Suddenly there was a knock on the door in the room. Link's long ears moved, and he hurriedly grabbed the phone and shouted, Zelda, get ready for battle. Pepper's exclamation came from the phone, Killian. Then after a chaos, the phone was hung up. Link said, with Zelda's protection, Pepper will be fine. Tony was still a little worried, but the phone could no longer be dialed, probably because it was damaged in a hurry. Tony immediately said, let's go to New York. Wait. Link hurriedly stopped Tony, looking surprised. What did you say? New York? Shouldn't it be Miami? Tony frowned and said, what Miami? The Mandarin is hiding in New York now. Link immediately realized that the world line had changed. But why is it New York again? Why is there so much going on in this place? Link shook his head, got in the car with Tony, and headed to find the Mandarin. At this moment in New York, the sea of magma and fire illuminated most of the sky. Although the number of New Yorkers has dropped sharply due to repeated disasters, and the city lights are much dimmer, the scorching flames still make up for the brightness of the metropolis, burning wantonly, as if it is the entrance to hell. The sky is turbid, and no stars can be seen. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I was lying on the bed typing, and fell asleep twice. Finally, I wrote only 2,000 words. It's amazing. The only good thing is that I didn't cough. I can't even come up with a chapter name. Chapter 156, Brave. The two were in the car, and Zelda quickly called again to report that they were safe. Link. We are all fine. Killian was beaten away by Zelda. It's strange that the guy actually gets hot. He caused some trouble to Zelda, but in the end I cut off one of his arms and scared him away. Link smiled and said, I'm glad you are okay. Leave the rest to me and Tony. Tony slammed the steering wheel hard. It's that bastard. He hated me because I forgot to meet him. Link said, you should realize the harm of breaking your promise, right? Tony thought about it. I promised Ethan that I would treat him to a big dinner after I escaped safely. I forgot about this. I want to apologize to him. Tony borrowed Link's mobile phone and called Harry. Hi. How is my Iron Man? Let him answer the phone. Then Jarvis's voice came from the receiver. Oh, sir. I'm fine, but my speech is a little confused. In fact, there was some problem with my charging device. The MK42 cannot be used for the time being. Tony slammed the brakes and hurriedly opened the window to breathe. But because of Link's appearance, he didn't act so exaggerated. Tony panted and said, Link, if you find that one day, all the abilities you rely on for survival have disappeared, you can't fly, you can't discharge electricity, you can't shield, and there is a terrible enemy waiting to deal with you, what will you do? Link thought for a while. It doesn't matter, I don't care. Tony groaned, you said it too lightly. I still remember what Roger said, without Iron Man, you are nothing. Link said, you have become fragile. Tony stared at Link. It's not me who is fragile. I was almost burned to death by a hot woman just now. Can you understand the fear of an ordinary person like me? Link said, you are not an ordinary person. You are Iron Man. Tony, no, Iron Man is my iron shell, not me. Link was a little distressed. Because of his appearance, Tony's frustration was alleviated a lot, but at the same time, Tony also lost the opportunity to transform himself. He was still in the fragile psychological state of relying on Iron Man. Link didn't know how to help Tony for a while. Link said gently, you are the creator of Iron Man. You are different from ordinary people. You have saved the world. Tony remained silent, his face gloomy, and he was in self-anxiety. Link remembered that when Rogers and Tony were arguing, Rogers said, without this suit, what are you? Tony answered calmly, genius, millionaire, playboy, philanthropist. Although it was a beautiful counterattack, Tony avoided the most critical question. Link thought for a while, and said to Tony, do you think I'm strong? Tony glared at Link and said, nonsense, you're a little monster who can even counter a nuclear bomb. Link said, do you think two ordinary people can defeat the Mandarin? Tony was puzzled. Link, what do you want to say? Link said, didn't you ask me just now? What should I do if I lose all my abilities, can't counter, can't fly, and can't discharge electricity? I also said, just now that I don't care, I'm still me. Anyway, this is not the first time I have lost my power. Goddess Hylia told me that strength comes from within. Link pointed at Tony, then pointed at himself. You don't need Iron Man, and I don't use my special abilities. And control the degree of use of your body's strength within the normal range. No lightning, no counter, no flying, just wisdom and courage. It's not Iron Man and the Son of God who go to catch the Mandarin, but Tony Stark and Link who go to catch the Mandarin. How about it? Do you want to go or not? Tony was silent for a while. His eyes gradually became bright again. You are trying to provoke me, right? Okay, I agree. Let's go. Half a day later, they came to the residential area where the Mandarin lived, and the two climbed over the wall and entered the yard. Tony brought a lot of homemade equipment. Link brought a metal baseball bat. At this time, two people came to patrol. Link lowered his body and quickly ran behind them. Ding ding. 2 hits. The two were knocked unconscious. Link adjusted the baseball cap on his head and whispered, "Let's go, Tony." When he came to the pool, Link sneaked over quietly, picked up a baseball bat directly, threw it over, and knocked out an enemy head on. The other man was about to shout. Link rushed up quickly, deflected, went around behind him, and punched him on the neck, knocking him unconscious. Although the action was slowed down a lot under Link's deliberate suppression, the action was very smooth, and he solved the two people in one go, which was beautiful beyond words. Because Link's other abilities were too dazzling. As a result, many people, such as Tony, ignored his own terrible combat power. He is proficient in all weapons, has a high battlefield reaction ability, and is the best archer in the world. Even without the 4 hero skill and the Shikasslate skill, Link is still a unique and powerful warrior in the world today. Link smiled and said, "You see, I'm fighting with ordinary people's methods." Then he continued to move forward with a baseball bat. Tony hurriedly followed him. This was the first time that Link did not use superpowers to fight, which made Tony's eyes light up. He also gradually understood what Link wanted to do. Link quietly touched the inside of the house. Compared with the outside, the inside was more loose. Link knocked down a man in black with a knife. So he quickly came to the Mandarin's room. Tony stepped forward and opened the cup and saw 2 women. Before the 2 women could scream, Tony immediately shouted, "Shut up," and hid behind the bed with Link. The sound of running water was heard in the bathroom, and the Mandarin walked out lazily, grinning. "Did you know? Fortune cookies are not from China, but..." Tony walked out with a nail gun and said coldly, "I finally caught you, Mandarin. I have a friend who is now unconscious by your people." But he also felt confused, because this Mandarin was very strange. The Mandarin confessed spinelessly. He said that he was just an actor, and the Mandarin and others were all scams, and the mastermind behind the scenes was Killian. At this moment, a carrier of the extremis virus broke in. The carrier of the extremis virus sneered at Tony. "Oh, look who it is. Tony Stark has fallen into the trap. Hey, Mandarin, I hope you didn't say anything, otherwise." Tony was a little panicked and shouted, "Link, don't worry about the rules of the game now. Use lightning to blow up this fireman." Chapter 157 Rescue. Link carried the baseball bat on his shoulder and said with a smile, "This guy's not worthy of my superpowers." He took a quick step forward and swung the baseball bat. The desperate virus carrier blocked the metal bat with his arm, and the metal bat quickly became hot and red. The desperate virus carrier stretched out his hand and punched Link, and his fist was red. No matter how powerful the punch was, if he touched it, he would definitely be burned. Tony shot a nail gun at the body of the desperate virus carrier, but for the desperate virus carrier with extremely strong regeneration ability, the metal on the nail gun melted immediately after hitting the skin. If Link used superpowers at this moment, he could easily cut off the desperate virus carrier with the sword light, or easily blow up the desperate virus carrier with the power of thunder, or easily suffocate the desperate virus carrier with the ice maker. But Link didn't plan to use superpowers. He wanted to prove to Tony that even without those powerful skills, the brave is still a brave, and the superhero is still a superhero. Link felt a wave of heat coming, and he quickly turned his body to dodge. The bat, which was burned into a shaped by the high temperature, stabbed towards the stomach of the desperate virus carrier. The desperate virus carrier used his hand to block. However, this stab was just a feint by Link, and then the baseball bat hit the desperate virus carrier's chin hard, making the desperate virus carrier's head feel dull and his movement sluggish. Link quickly raised the baseball bat and hit him hard in the face, knocking him down 3 times in a row. Although the desperate virus carrier has a super regenerative ability, key parts such as the heart and brain are always vulnerable. Link took out the pistol he took from the living room and shot it at the eye socket. Bang! The battle was over. Even without superpowers, Link could easily kill the desperate virus carrier with his skilled combat experience. Link smiled and said, "Let's go." Oh. Tony was a little slow. The gunshots attracted the attention of the other two virus carriers, who hurried over. Suddenly, from behind the corner, they stretched out a leg and tripped the one in front, then hit the other one's knee with a baseball bat. The two extremis virus carriers fell to the ground. Link came out and hit them with a baseball bat. Under Link's pressure, one of them suddenly began to tremble constantly, and the temperature around them rose rapidly. Link smiled. His plan was to force the extremis virus carrier to self-explode and then drag Tony away in a hurry. There was a loud explosion behind them. Tony looked at Link's back in a trance. Even without any superpowers, Link was still calm. This gave Tony a lot of inspiration, and his dependence on Iron Man seemed to be getting more and more indifferent. The two walked out of the door and saw 6 enemies with guns found them and shot at Link. Link and Tony hurriedly dodged. Tony said, "You're helpless now, right?" Link was not convinced. "If you can, come in. I'll beat them one by one." As soon as he finished speaking, a man rushed in quickly, turned around and shot at them. Link hurriedly grabbed the man's wrist and pushed it up, and the bullets sprayed towards the ceiling, hitting the ground with dust. Link stretched out his fist and hit the man's chin. The man immediately went limp and fainted. Link took the gun from his hand. Tony said, "I know you can't use a gun. Give it to me." Link threw the gun to Tony, but said, "You may not need it." He took out a grenade from the clothes of the fainted man, twisted it, and threw it outside. Bang! Shrapnel flew everywhere, and dust flew everywhere. At this time, Link rushed over quickly, looked around, and found that there were 3 people who were not dead, facing the smoke. While they were stunned by the bomb, he swung the baseball bat and knocked them out 2 or 3 times. Link coughed twice because of the smoke. At this time, Rhoda, who woke up dazed in the basement, came out. Tony was startled and almost fired a volley of bullets. "Tony, me, Rhoda." Rhoda raised his hand hurriedly. "Killian stole my battle suit and ran away." Tony said, "His target is the president. Let's go after him." So the 3 of them drove the Mandarin's luxury yacht to chase him. Tony's battle suit was now fully charged, and he rushed over quickly to rescue the people on the plane, but the president had already been captured by Killian. Needless to say, at night, Tony, Link, and Rhoda came to the dock. Rhoda was very puzzled, not using superpowers. "Why?" Link said, "To teach a man who can't breathe without Iron Man." Tony was unhappy. Okay, I know you are powerful, Rhoda, but if you use superpowers, we can rescue the president immediately. There is no need to take such a big risk. Link, even if you don't use superpowers, it's easy to rescue your president. Watch me, don't do it. Tony said to Rhoda seriously, "I don't know why this guy has been so arrogant recently." Link smiled. "Just watch." At this moment, the war machine wrapped the president and was suspended in the air by 2 ropes. He wanted to burn the president to death with oil. Link quietly moved forward and took out his bow and arrow from the weapon space. He used the explosive arrows he got from Hawkeye to shoot the oil barrel. Boom. There was a burst of fire. When Killian was arranging the signal relay work, he heard an explosion outside and walked out immediately. His face was grim. What the hell? Killian's men were busy putting out the fire, and only a few were watching around the president. Link put on the big black coat he had prepared in advance and sneaked over. I have to say, deliberately not using superpowers, restricting oneself, and taking risks only with combat skills and strategies. There is a kind of fun of the Emperor's incognito visit. In the light of the fire, Link sneaked quickly and shot the closely monitored enemy to death with 1 arrow. Although Link's archery skills are almost superpowers, it is a skill he has practiced with great difficulty. He quickly came to the rope of the overhead war machine. Link took off his black coat, grabbed the upper and lower ends, and slid directly down the rope, quickly approaching the president hanging in the air. The person monitoring from the opposite side shouted, "Who is it?" Link slid up to the president and said with a smile, "Hello." The president was surprised and said, "Oh Link. You are the first one to save me. My daughter likes you very much." Bang, boom, boom. The enemy opened fire and the bullets flew under the night sky. Link cut the rope and swung to the opposite side with the president like a swing. "Sorry, there are only 2 chapters today. I'm not feeling well, and my mental state is very bad. I have been in a daze sitting in front of the computer. If I'm in better condition tomorrow, I will add more chapters to compensate you. How about 8 chapters tomorrow? Thank you all for your support. Chapter 158 Where the Sword Points. Link swung over with the president in the war machine suit, and the two fell heavily to the ground. Since the president did not have the authority to control the war machine was just a restraint that affected his ability to move. Soon a large group of enemies surrounded them. Link pulled the bow left and right, shot the first few, and then dragged the president down. There was the sound of gunfire behind him. Link was relatively petite, so he used the tall president as a cover. Anyway, the defensive performance of the war machine was not afraid of bullets. The president stumbled down the stairs with Link, thanking him constantly. You are such a good citizen of our country. On my behalf, and on behalf of the whole country. Link waved his hands impatiently. Okay, let's get out first. Suddenly, 2 people ran towards the stairs. Link estimated their speed and looked at the president with a smile. Can you do me a favor? The president smiled and said, of course I'm willing to help. Oh. Link pushed the president back from a height of 4 meters. The weight of the war machine directly crushed the 2 people to death. Link also jumped over the railing and jumped down. He pulled the president up and hid behind the president, shouting, let's run. The president shouted, someone is shooting at us. Link said, you are not afraid of bullets, close your visor. Link urged the president to run quickly, and a large number of enemies caught up. Tony watched from a distance with the telescope, a little anxious. Link, this kid, are you really going to not use superpowers for the whole process? But Link couldn't dodge all the dense bullets. Suddenly, a bullet was fired at the back of his head. Link turned around quickly and bit his mouth. The bullet was tightly held by his upper and lower teeth, and then he chewed and ate it. Having good teeth is not a superpower, right? Link explained to himself while breathing out. But these enemies obviously have not received actual combat training, otherwise they would not be so stupid to rush over here. Link jumped out from behind the president, pulled the bow to the full, and shot an explosive arrow, instantly killing the gang. But there were still 5 extremis virus carriers rushing towards them. The president shouted, Link, use your thunder and lightning to solve them. Link imitated Tony's tone and said, sorry, I'm too poor and don't have money to charge the battery, go. He kicked the president, and the president shouted and overwhelmed a extremis virus carrier. Link hurriedly summoned a royal sword customized by Tony from the weapon space. In order to maintain the current ordinary person image, Link did not even use the big sword. The president overwhelmed 1 person, and there were still 4 powerful human bombs on the scene, while the ordinary person Link only had a cold weapon. Link shook his wrist, made a sword flower, and pointed the blade upward. You all come together, I'm in a hurry. The 4 desperate virus carriers did not hold back. Just because Link looked like a child, they knew how powerful Link was. They surrounded him from all sides, and Link suddenly stretched out his sword, like a venomous snake jumping out of a hole. Link turned his body and stepped on the ground frequently. The 4 desperate virus carriers besieged together, and the scene was a bit chaotic. Link crouched down and easily dodged. Then he turned his hand and stretched out a sword, piercing the back of one of them. After all, it was a weapon developed by Tony, so it was naturally resistant to high temperatures. Link poked the man in the back of the head, then clenched his hands and stirred them. The man's body twitched fatally, and then fell on his companion. The 3 saw that Link easily killed 1 person. It was estimated that the extremis virus not only transformed their bodies, but also their brains, and each one was more stubborn than the other. The death of their companions, facing the long-renowned Link, although he was trying to maintain his ordinary persona, not only was they not afraid, but they also rushed over more manically. But these extremis virus carriers, although they have terrifying high temperatures, there are also strong men who are military. But for Link, the actions and attack methods are too simple, not even as good as one of Halalu's Pokebulins. Even if Link is now a cripple, he can play with them in the palm of his hand. Cluster. Link twisted and turned, and inserted himself into the 4 people. His coat rubbed against one of the bodies and burned. Link quickly took off his clothes, grabbed them and threw them on the face of the desperate virus carrier. Under the light of the fire, a sword pierced out from behind the clothes, and pierced into the eye socket. Link pressed down hard, then twisted it, and killed another person. He leaned back to dodge the punch of the person next to him and backflipped his body. The war machine was very heavy and the desperate virus carrier couldn't get up. He yelled, "Asshole, move your body away. Otherwise I will burn you through." The president shouted, "You stinky boy, don't you know how to respect the elderly?" In order to help Link a little, he quickly turned his body and pressed the face of the desperate virus carrier under him with both hands. The desperate virus carrier was hot all over, and the inside of his battlesuit suddenly became an oven. But the president was unwilling to let go. After killing 2 people, Link's long hair flew, and he attacked again with a sword, stabbing forward. In his usual battles, in order to release the sword light, he always chose to use large slashes. But in this kind of primitive fighting, stabbing is more effective. Link stabbed, and the 3 suddenly retreated at the same time, looking at each other. Then they stretched out their arms and hugged Link, trying to kill Link with their heat. Faced with the 3 passionate hugs, Link lowered his body and rolled to avoid them. With 3 consecutive slashes, he cut off the head of a desperate virus carrier and then kicked another one in the face. Link took the opportunity to rush over, thrusting his sword into the man's chest, piercing through his body and out from the back. In a blink of an eye, there was only one person left. Link stabbed with his sword, and the man blocked with his hand. But when the sword was about to poke his hand, Link quickly moved to the left and inserted it into the man's neck, and then pushed the hilt of the sword like a mill. The head of the virus carrier was twisted off by Link's sword. The 4 were cleanly killed and lay on the ground like burning coals. Because Link's movements were so smooth and efficient, the 4 well-trained people looked like elderly people with limited mobility, and they were almost powerless to fight back. The president called out from behind, "Link, Link, I'm holding one person down, come and kill him." Link trotted forward, but stood with his hands on his hips, and did not move. He said to the president, "He's dead." The president was stunned. He was attracted by Link's fight just now, and did not notice that the desperate virus carrier under him had stopped struggling. He let go of his hand, and found that the man had been suffocated to death by him. It seemed that, because his body was burning, and needed more oxygen, the desperate virus carrier's death was even more painful. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 159, Sword and Fire. Witnessing Link's superb sword skills, Roddy couldn't help but say, "Oh my god. So cool." Then he noticed Tony was looking at him strangely. Roddy said, "What do you think?" Tony nodded. "I feel the same way." Unlike Link's usual sword fighting battles, this battle was more realistic. Without all the fancy special effects, Link's own strong fighting power was exposed, making the spectators even more frightened. "Let's go." Link pulled up the president. Since Link was saving energy throughout the whole process, this was the easiest battle for Link since he came to the Marvel world. A shirtless man walked down the stairs and looked at Link coldly. "It's not good to take my guest away like this," the president shouted angrily. "This is called kidnapping." Link, hit him. Link stepped forward and said in a deep voice, "Why don't you put on your clothes properly?" Tony in the distance knocked on the railing fiercely. "Damn it. I usually say such jokes." Killian said angrily, "It was the flames in my body that burned you. You will also turn to ashes like my clothes." He opened his mouth and blew out a fireball, and Link hid behind the president with a whoosh. The fireball exploded on the president's body, and the president's terrified voice came from the visor. He can spit fire." Link stuck his head out to observe the situation. "Come on, what's so surprising? There is someone who can discharge electricity behind you." Tony slammed the railing again. "Damn it. I should be the one to complain about this," Roddy said silently. "Doesn't your hand hurt?" "What kind of question are you asking?" Tony glared at Roddy, then shook his hand with a hissing sound. "Of course it hurts, Roddy." Link walked out with a sword and stabbed forward. Killian laughed. "You dare to hit me without even using a gun. You little brat is a little arrogant." Tony said from a distance, "It's not that he is arrogant, but he doesn't know how to use a gun at all." Then he gestured to Roddy. "Do you know? This kid threw the gun as a stick and killed a person. I kept wondering at the time which barbaric tribe this kid came from. Killian suddenly roared, "Can you guys shut up?" He opened his mouth and blew a mouthful of fire at the place where Tony and Rhoda were hiding. The two guys quickly dodged and Tony shouted, "So you have already discovered us?" Rhoda shouted impatiently, "Shut up, you are making a lot of noise next to us, who doesn't know you are here?" But the president opened his visor and looked at Tony and Rhoda in surprise as they ran away with their heads in their arms. "You are here too? Why did you let Link take the risk to save me?" Rhoda pouted and coughed awkwardly. "We are responsible for the important behind the scenes work." Link and Killian fought each other. Killian is different from other carriers of the Extremis virus. His body is more adaptable to the virus, and the virus enhances his strength more, and even enhances his speed. So much so that he can survive 2 explosions. Killian blew a mouthful of fire at Link, and Link sank his body, kicked him to the ground, and slashed at his neck with a sword, but Killian quickly turned over to avoid it, and the royal sword slashed on the ground. Sparks flew. Killian grinned and said, "Have you lost your superpowers?" Killian grabbed the royal sword. His body temperature was even higher, and he could melt even the outer shell of Iron Man, let alone the royal sword. Killian grabbed the royal sword with one hand and quickly pinched Link's neck with the other hand. He loved pinching people's necks. He broke into the room and wanted to pinch Pepper's neck, but his arm was immediately cut off by a beautiful and fierce girl. Link ducked and rolled over and stretched out mist-eating, tied the branches to the hilt of the royal sword, and pulled it over. However, the royal sword had been melted off. Killian's eyes were on Tony and Roddy, who were sneaking over. Compared with Link, Tony was more hated. He rushed towards Tony, and then, "Pa!" Killian fell to the ground hard, and magma came out of his nostrils. He raised his head and glared at the defend Link, who was tackling with a red card gesture with murderous eyes. Roddy stepped forward and quickly grabbed War Machine, saying, "Mr. President, you look very handsome in this suit, but it's time to return it to its original owner." President, "Oh, thank you for the compliment. By the way, don't you think this suit is a little tight underneath?" Roddy's face darkened. "Yes, President, you are a little fat." Link chopped continuously with the broken sword, and Killian blocked with his arm. Killian had a dragon tattoo on his body and seemed to know some martial arts. The threat he posed to Link was far greater than that of other virus carriers. Killian's body was like a burning coal, and he was a very powerful weapon. As long as he caught Link and hugged him tightly, he could kill Link. But Link's body was very flexible. Even though he had slowed down, Killian still couldn't catch him. Instead, Link stabbed him hard with a few swords. Link waited for Killian to attack again. Suddenly, he took the opportunity to stab Killian from behind and stabbed him in the back. Link sent the sword into his body, stirring, and from the melted sword, the touch of a broken heart and blood spurting came. In order to prevent Killian from struggling to death, he hugged Link before dying and burned him. Link drew his sword and retreated to observe Killian's situation. Because Killian's vitality was really strong, Link could not guarantee that he could kill him with one sword. Then, Link suddenly found that Killian's body was filled with a strong Ganon curse power. Link's heart trembled, and he planned to rush forward with a thunder force to completely kill the carrier of Ganon curse power before it was released. But suddenly, a cannon came and blew Killian directly into the sea. Link looked back and saw Roddy wearing a war machine. Roddy smiled and said, "I love this armor." But then he saw Link with his hands on his hips glaring at him, and hurriedly said, "Oh, Link, I'm not stealing your limelight, but he is too dangerous. I haven't confirmed whether this guy's dead or alive." Link hurried to the beach to check, but in the middle of the night, he couldn't see anything. Roddy ran over awkwardly and said, "He must be dead after being blown up like that." He was a little worried that Link would be angry. Link stared at the dark sea in a trance. He could no longer feel the power of Ganon's curse. This was very strange. He's still alive. He escaped. Roddy's face froze. He felt quite guilty. When Link was feeling distressed, he remembered the whispers of the goddess Hylia. Complete the trial of the brave. Get the enhanced time stop skill. Chapter 160 Ancient Giant, Part 3. Link is not a person who likes to worry. He can take it and let it go. The reward from Goddess Hylia just now has diverted Link's attention from his low mood. The time stop skill has been strengthened. The time stop skill can only work on non-living things, such as stones, iron plates, and tree trunks at first. According to Link's experiments, it can also work on the user himself, playing a good defensive effect. With the time stop skill strengthened, Link can temporarily fix the living thing and make it a live target. And because of the upgrade, even in the stagnation process, Link can still hit it, and the damage will be superimposed after the time stop ends. It is Link's favorite Sheikah's late skill in Hyrule. In this way, he is relieved. Let Killian run away, wait until he becomes stronger, and then be defeated by Link. The reward given to Link by Goddess Hylia will also be more generous. It is not bad to be able to get the gift of Goddess Hylia twice from one person. It's okay. I'll defeat him. When he runs out, Link waved his hand. But Rode still blamed himself. The president stepped forward and shook Link's hand solemnly. Thank you, Tony and Rode, for your heroic sacrifice. The president returned safely and held a press conference that night and arrested the vice president. At the press conference, the president praised Link without regard for the restrictions on his words to the outside world. The camera flashed. The incident of the Mandarin came to an end. When Link went home for dinner, Killian was covered by a dark red cannon pollution and floated on the sea. Before dawn, he went ashore. He went to the place where the magma sea of fire was. The agent on guard saw a ball of sludge-like cannon curse. It was not clear what it was. When he was about to report the situation, the cannon pollution suddenly rushed over, penetrated into the agent's nostrils and mouth, and swallowed it. Then he continued to go to the magma sea of fire. When he came to the edge, the cannon pollution was absorbed into Killian's body, revealing Killian's pale face and body. His eyes showed an ominous dark red. He said, "Power. Revenge." Then he jumped down alone and jumped into the sea of magma and fire. He was drowned by it. Link and Tony returned. Pepper and Tony hugged each other, and Tony promised Pepper that he would no longer be obsessed with making battle suits and ignore her feelings. Princess Washang blamed herself a little. If I had killed Killian, he wouldn't have caught the president. Who is the president? What a strange name. So many people flashed cameras at him. Link thought for a moment. He should be the king of this country, right? Princess Washang said, we entered his country without permission as foreigners. He won't feel offended by us, right? Tony laughed and said, little girl, Hyrule is not a legal country on Earth. Besides, I have helped you get legal status. Don't worry about it. Pepper rubbed his eyes. He was a little sleepy and said tenderly, what about me? Tony also showed a fatherly smile this time and touched Peppa's little head. Silly child, I also helped you get a pet ID card. Ah, don't bite me. I'm kidding. You. Big carrot. How can you have such sharp teeth? Peppa bit Tony's fingers like a fierce puppy. His teeth as soft as the bridge of his nose were not enough to bite Tony. Since Link's house was bombed, he lived in Tony's new house. Thinking of the room that the two princesses had carefully prepared for him being destroyed, Peppa was sad and bit Tony's hand again. Tony hurriedly called the construction company and asked them to recreate the old house from beginning to end. Peppa was satisfied. The next morning, the two princesses were still sleeping. Link had already gotten up and went out to practice swordplay under the warm sunshine. The sword energy was restrained, but it made a whirring sound. With every move, it seemed as if the whole space was shaking. Epona, who was tied to the lawn outside the yard by Link, saw Link and snorted proudly, wagging her tail, wanting Link to come over and play with her. But Link's eyes were focused on the blade, his spirit settled in each swing, his heart was like a frozen lake, and he was not moved by external things. Even Tony, who ran downstairs in a hurry, called him, but Link could not hear it. Zelda lazily finished washing up, with her silky blonde hair hanging down. She squinted her eyes at the clear sky outside the window, knocked on the window, and said to Tony outside the window, wait until Link finishes his sword skills, then he will notice you. Tony was helpless. Well, there is actually nothing big that needs to wake Link up. It's just a big monster that was born in New York. Monster? Zelda was startled, and then calmed down. New York, it's normal. Tony spread his hands. Yes. When Link hears this news later, I guess the first thing he says is why. After a while, the Washang princess also woke up. Although she was a little sleepy, she was dressed up when she left the room. Her blonde hair was carefully combed and dressed up, and she wore her favorite crown of thorns on her head. Unlike Link and Zelda, who are now completely dressed in modern clothes, the clothes worn by the Washang princess are more like the dress of a princess from a fantasy world. It is worth mentioning that these clothes were all sewn for her by the clever Zelda. Zelda was watching the news on her tablet, and she saw today's headline, which was about a giant monster appearing in New York. The news that the president was successfully rescued was suppressed by the popularity of the news. This giant monster was covered in a dirty color like blood and asphalt mixed together, and its shape was more like a giant than a monster. Part of the skeleton was exposed on the face of this magma giant. This video was taken from a distance by a helicopter, so the picture was very blurry. But this blurring enhanced the impact of the magma giant, as if it was a monster in a special effects movie. This head. The Washang princess put her hands on Zelda's shoulders and leaned over. The two Zeldas are already very familiar with each other. Princess Washang said softly, "I seem to have seen this head somewhere before." Zelda asked, "Is it a monster from your world?" Princess Washang shook her head. "No, it is in this world. Have you forgotten? Just before the magma sea of fire appeared, the belly of the rock giant burst open, and inside was a skeleton fortress. Indeed, the head of this magma giant is round and bulging, and it is very similar to the skeleton fortress that fell into the magma before." Zelda's face is solemn. According to the research of scholars in our world, the skeleton fortress is the fossil of some ancient giant. Could it be that the ancient giant has been resurrected? Chapter 161 Ancient Giant. Oh my god. I found out that the chapter name was repeated after uploading. Link had just finished practicing swordplay, and he didn't even break a sweat. He turned around and saw Tony, the two princesses, and Pepper, who had just finished a lot of work, all watching him. Tony smiled and said, "Link, something happened again in New York." Link nodded. "I'm not surprised at all." He walked up and took the glass of juice handed to him by Zelda, drank it in one breath, and then saw the screen on the tablet in Tony's hand. His face twitched, and he sighed. It's worthy of being the center of the world. Without saying much, Link had already gotten used to frequent trips to New York, and immediately took a plane to New York with Tony and others. Soon Nick sent a video call to Tony, and Nick's dark face appeared on the screen. Due to the frequent disasters, Nick's face was even uglier. Let me tell you something bad. This disgusting giant is related to the lava pool that Link encountered. The lava water level has dropped by 1/3. This is a video footage that our people risked their lives to take a look. On the screen, the lava sea of fire was indeed much smaller. Looking from the sky, one could clearly see a winding and twisted figure lurking in the pool. Link and Zelda exclaimed at the same time, "Olong!" Nick's muffled voice came, "Is it a dragon? I thought it was a giant python. I just don't know whether this snake or dragon is dead or alive." Tony asked, "When I watched the news, the monster had destroyed 1/5 of New York. Now it's probably in ruins?" Nick said, "No, this monster destroyed many buildings, but its range of activities is always near the magma pool. It is not clear why." Link, "Do you have such monsters in Hyrule?" Zelda said, "There is no record, but there is a huge skull similar to the head shape of this monster. Scholars in our world believe that this is some kind of super ancient giant before the birth of the Hylians." Tony muttered, "Isn't this the dinosaur of Hyrule?" They soon came to the sea of magma and fire. Tony asked the bird to carry the detection device he developed and throw it into the magma. Jarvis' voice came, "Sir, I detected that unknown energy is being transferred from the snake-like monster under the magma pool to this humanoid monster on the surface." Tony corrected, "Jarvis, that's a dragon-shaped monster." Zelda immediately reacted and looked at Link. "Did you see it? Part of the body of this ancient giant still has exposed bones. He is absorbing the life force of Olon in an attempt to revive." The magma sea of fire suddenly churned up. According to the video transmitted by the bird, Olon at the bottom of the pool was twisting constantly and looked very painful. The ground was shaking, and part of the land on the edge of the magma broke again and fell into the magma pool. Tony looked at the ancient giant with cannon pollution all over his body and said, "It seems that our goal today is to defeat this big guy." By the way, where did Banner go? This kind of monster should be left to him to deal with. Link is a man of action. Without saying a word, he picked up the Master Sword and planned to rush up to cut the ancient giant. But Tony hurriedly grabbed Link and said, "Don't worry, leave this battle to me. Big guys should be dealt with by big guys." Link didn't understand what Tony meant. Zelda was a little happy and asked, "Tony, have you developed any new weapons?" Tony smiled wickedly and said, "Watch me. Let the party begin." Link suddenly realized that Tony was summoning more than 30 iterations of his Iron Man. Did Tony want to use more than 30 Iron Men to bombard the ancient giant? At this moment, a fire came from the distance. Link saw that it was Roddy's war machine. He quickly attacked the ancient giant. 2 macro missiles flew out and exploded on the top of the ancient giant's head. But it had no effect at all. Instead, the ancient giant punched War Machine through the flames. Roddy pursed his lips tightly. "How could I be easily caught by you?" He dodged by diving, and then saw the ancient giant suddenly opened his mouth and spurted out a mouthful of flames, instantly submerging War Machine. A high temperature red warning quickly appeared on the display interface in front of Roddy. He could only turn his body and fly out of the flame attack range quickly and said, Tony, please. I hope your armor has better heat insulation performance." Seeing his good friend being submerged in flames, Tony clenched his fists. A second later, War Machine flew out of the flames with a red body. At this time, a heavy voice came from the ancient giant. "Roddy, do you still recognize me?" This tone of speaking. Tony looked weird. Is it Killian? However, War Machine was red all over. If he didn't cool down quickly, Roddy would suffocate to death in it. Tony waved his hand hurriedly to attract the attention of War Machine's eyes. War Machine captured Tony's figure and zoomed in. Roddy saw Tony and Link and rushed over in a sweat. He knew that Link could bring coolness to him in a high temperature state. Roddy fell in front of Link in a daze, and his consciousness was a little blurred. Link stretched out his hands, and a burst of cold air that made everyone tremble spread out. The armor of War Machine made a strange crackling sound and quickly cooled down and turned into a black humanoid statue. Okay. Link is fine. I'm already shivering with cold. Roddy shouted hurriedly, and Link stopped releasing cold air. Roddy suddenly shouted again, "Damn. War Machine seems to be broken." The cold and heat caused the outer shell of War Machine to form a hole, and the movable parts of the joints melted into one. War Machine became Roddy's living coffin. Link took a step forward, turned around and kicked War Machine fiercely. The surface of War Machine immediately cracked and was kicked open by Link. Roddy swallowed a mouthful of saliva and squeezed out from the torn armor. He was so cold that white steam came out of his body. Link's kick just now was aimed at his chest, which caused him a great psychological trauma. Roddy thanked Link, then his head sank, and he almost fainted. Tony hurriedly supported Roddy. At this time, the ancient giant also discovered Link and Tony because of the War Machine and shouted at once, "How dare you come to me?" Roddy looked up at the ancient giant blankly. "He is Killian? What's going on?" Killian walked over step by step, shaking the earth. "I was almost killed by your cannon. Fortunately, Lord Ganon blessed me and gave me a new body and stronger firepower." After being contaminated and corroded by Ganon, Killian jumped into the magma pool. Because of the desperate virus in his body and the influence of Ganon's curse, his body merged with the infinite magma in the magma sea of fire, using magma as bones and flesh, and the skull of the ancient giant as a model to reshape his body and absorb the life force of Olon imprisoned at the bottom, so as to revive. When Olon's vitality is exhausted, the extinct ancient giant will be reborn. Chapter 162 Stark's Secret Weapon, 5th update. Tony cleared his throat. "Killian, since you are still alive, the hatred for my friend Happy and you for blowing up Link's house is not over yet. Even if you become an extinct creature, I will exterminate you again regardless of the opposition of the Animal Protection Organization." The ancient giant said nothing and stepped on him. Link suddenly jumped up and countered the sky shield. He used the Hylia shield to bounce back the ancient giant's step in the high temperature. Tony looked at the horizon, and the smile on his face became more and more arrogant. "Killian, look at what gift I prepared for you." More than 30 Iron Men flew in the sky. The reporters and SHIELD agents who were observing the ancient giant from afar all looked up and stared blankly at the shadows passing through the sky one by one, flying towards the idea of the ancient giant. Bang! More than 30 Iron Men stretched out their hands at the same time and released rays of light, hitting and exploding on the head of the ancient giant, blowing it back 2 steps. The ancient giant roared, "Do you think these little fleas can defeat me?" The ancient giant stretched out his hands and grabbed randomly, and the Iron Man Corps scattered like a swarm of bees, and then regrouped and attacked, hitting the ancient giant's head again. The ancient giant spewed out hot flames from his mouth, and the Iron Man Corps dispersed in response, but a relatively bulky Jack Iron Man was unfortunately roasted into a puddle of molten iron and stuck on the ground. Tony's face changed. "What's going on with this strange high temperature?" Tony waved his hand and shouted, "Do you think this is my trump card? Of course not. Iron Man assemble." Turning back to Link, he raised his lips and smiled. "You are fine. I was going to compare my secret weapon with you." Link put his hands on his hips and looked at the sky. "Well, I'm watching." More than 30 Iron Men gathered together, their armors disassembled and connected to each other. The click-click assembly sound kept ringing, just like the Transformers transforming. A huge combined mechanical giant appeared in front of Link. Ha ha ha. Tony laughed. "See? This is my secret weapon." More than 30 Iron Men combined into one, an unprecedented iron giant. The firepower is 30 times that of a single little Iron Man. More than 30 reactors share energy, generating an extremely strong defensive energy field, which is not afraid of the high temperature of this big guy. What do you think, Link? Awesome, right? Do you feel surprised? Link looked at the iron giant in front of him, and it was hard to describe. Link, it looks so stupid. Tony, Zelda really likes the messy shape of the iron giant, but, Zelda asked Tony, what is the name of this machine? Tony smiled and said, Iron Giant. Only such a domineering name is worthy of such an outstanding masterpiece. Zelda pointed to the ancient giant who was twice as tall as the Iron Giant, but he is not as tall as the ancient giant, so he should not be called a giant, right? Tony's smile froze. Indeed, the Iron Giant is very tall, but compared with the ancient giant, it only reaches the waist. The two giants stood together, and the giant looked like the son of the ancient giant. The ancient giant was stunned at first, and then he rumbled and taunted, Tony, are you going to enter the toy industry? Roddy was also a little speechless, and said weakly, this reminds me of some cartoon. I make up the head or something. The ancient giant raised his foot, and kicked the iron giant. Tony's masterpiece was continuously not optimistic, which made Tony very upset. He pointed at the ancient giant and said, Jarvis, cut the ancient giant shorter than the iron giant. Jarvis said, yes, sir. The body of the iron giant began to move, stretched out his hands, lifted the feet of the ancient giant, and then a shoulder throw. The iron giant pulled the legs of the ancient giant and threw him to the ground. The ground shook violently, and Link and others were shaken half a meter high. Roddy shouted, great. Link was really shocked by the power of the Iron Giant. The power he showed just now was even stronger than Link's use of Darkle. He suddenly remembered something, and hurriedly called Nick, saying in a serious tone, if anyone dares to throw a nuclear bomb at me when Tony and I are fighting monsters, I will take the nuclear bomb to SHIELD. Nick said angrily, okay, no problem. Tony folded his hands, and looked at the battlefield, his body and shoulders rising and falling as the ground shook. He said to Link, you have been the protagonist on the battlefield for too long. This time it's my turn to be in the limelight. Link smiled and said, it just so happens. Let me take a break. Tony looked at everyone's surprise and nodded with satisfaction. That's right. In fact, the Iron Giant was a temporary name given by Tony to avoid misunderstanding. The real name given to this collection of more than 30 Iron Men by Tony is called Anti-Link Armor. Since it was impossible to really use it against Link, Tony simply used it to fight the ancient titan and enjoyed the shock of others. A fearless reporter in the distance shouted, what did we see? Tony created a new suit, a super large mechanical monster. Look. Two giants are fighting and wrestling with each other. My god, I can feel the ground shaking here. The giant Iron Man is lying on the giant magma monster and punching. Ah. The giant magma monster grabbed his hand. No. The giant Iron Man was thrown out. This was the reporter who reported Link's fight against the rock giant last time. Although the audience complained that he was more like a game commentator than a news reporter, his status in the media company he belonged to rose because of his high popularity, and he was given the important task of reporting the super heavyweight news of the ancient titan. The Iron Giant and the ancient titan wrestled together, and the defensive energy field Tony mentioned was indeed very strong. The ancient giant was covered in hot magma and cannon pollution. The Iron Giant and the ancient giant were in close combat, and a layer of light film on his body prevented the external heat from damaging the machinery. Jarvis, withdraw, use long-range attack. The Iron Giant immediately jumped back and left. Link and others were shaken up half a meter, but only Tony fell down. Beep. The Iron Giant put his hands together, and the mechanical structure formed a circular cannon barrel. Waves of energy light waves gathered in the center and gradually became hot. Tony pointed at the ancient giant like a pirate captain and shouted, "Fire!" Bang! The barrel released high heat energy, and the surrounding area was immediately shrouded in strong light, a pure white. Chapter 163 Life Supply, 6th update. Ugh, my eyes. Tony was shaken by the strong light and burst into tears. When the light dispersed, a thick beam of incandescent light shot straight at the ancient giant. The momentum was extremely loud. Because it was close to the magma sea of fire, the temperature was abnormally warm in winter. Under the high temperature of the light, it quickly became hot. The two princesses took Link's hand and said hurriedly, "Link, we are hot." Link's body paused, and frost immediately formed from his feet and spread to all directions. The people around him immediately felt a coolness. Roddy was tossed back and forth between cold and heat, and his head began to feel dizzy again. Tony rubbed his eyes. Why didn't you get blinded by the strong light? The ancient giant also felt the strong threat from the steel giant, and immediately blocked his chest with both hands, crossed his arms, and the thick light hit his arms. The ancient giant was forced to retreat 5 steps, and his body began to tremble. The two giant arms formed by magma quickly dissolved and shattered. Crack. The arms burst, and the light penetrated, and hit his chest. The ancient giant screamed immediately, and the sound was so loud that the whole New York could hear it. Tony pointed at the ancient giant. "Jarvis, don't stop. Pierce his heart." "Okay, sir." The edges of the gun holes in the arms of the Iron Giant began to turn red, and it was obviously overloaded, but at Tony's request, Jarvis increased the output power of the light. The arms suddenly exploded, some debris burst out, and the two mechanical arms began to spark. But just when the Iron Giant was about to give up, boom. The light burst through the body of the ancient giant. Jarvis immediately stopped the light attack, and the two mechanical arms disintegrated with a click. But this price was worth it. A big hole was burned in the chest of the ancient giant. At this time, the sun was shining through the big hole, and the body of the ancient giant stood there sluggishly. Tony clapped his hands. "Well done. This kind of battle should be recorded in history, so that those stupid middle school students will remember my great achievements. Oh my god. Iron Man won. Tony Stark used the power of technology to defeat this humanoid Godzilla. We won. New York won." The reporter held the microphone, as if he was going to put it in his mouth, shouting wildly. The audience watching the live broadcast in front of the TV turned down the volume silently. But just when the whole world breathed a sigh of relief, Link suddenly frowned. "No, this guy's not dead." Princess Washan looked at the magma sea of fire, only to see the sea of fire churning violently again, cracking from the edge, and spreading directly to Link's feet. The three Hylians faintly heard the sound of a dragon's roar. A long magma flew out of the air, across the sky, and the magma did not cool down, and it poured into the hole in the chest of the ancient giant like orange juice. Tony shouted, "No, this guy wants to use the power of magma to reshape his body. Jarvis, attack." "Okay, sir." The Iron Giant jumped up and kicked the ancient giant fiercely. His arms were damaged by the light attack just now, so he could only use this lame attack method. But 10 meters away from the ancient giant, a layer of light film suddenly appeared, on which a dragon-shaped figure swam violently. It swam for less than a second and suddenly stopped. The light film shone brightly and directly bounced the Iron Giant away. A large number of light spots emerged from the magma sea of fire, just like a red starry sky, rising from the magma and pouring into the body of the ancient giant. The body of the ancient giant started to move again, and the body was even bigger than before. In the magma sea of fire, a shocking dragon roar sounded, which was extremely harsh. Everyone could easily feel the desperate pain of all on. It seems that I still have to take action. Link took out the Master Sword, spread his wings behind him, and Libal's body took shape. Another tough opponent. Go ahead, Link, use my power to defeat him. The Iron Giant was hit hard on the ground. Just as he was about to stand up, he was stepped on by the ancient giant. Jarvis sent an alarm to Tony. The energy field is about to collapse. Snap. There was a sound, and the surface film of the Iron Giant immediately collapsed and disintegrated. The ancient giant roared and stepped through the chest of the Iron Giant. Just as the Iron Giant had just pierced the chest of the ancient giant, the offensive and defensive situation changed quickly. Rode murmured, "It still depends on Link." Tony glared at Rode fiercely. It seems that you don't need me to help you repair the war machine. Rode, hahaha, don't take it seriously. Help me check the status of the Iron Patriot. Tony, why did you change the name of the battle suit? I won't repair it. The good war machine was messed up by your military. The military loves to make changes so much. Ask them to repair it. Just when Tony and Rode were arguing, Link drew a long sword in the sky, fiercely cutting towards the ancient giant. The sword was like a kite line in the air, falling on the ancient giant's shoulder, and immediately opened a cut. Link. The ancient giant glared at Link fiercely. Because part of his face was still covered, the exposed bones made his face look extremely ferocious. The ancient giant opened his mouth and spewed out a large ball of flames, burning and twisting the surrounding air. Link also stretched out a hand, releasing cold air. Ice and fire faced each other, and suddenly, many violent vortex airflows began to appear in the air nearby, carrying the ruins on the ground and rushing into the sky. The temperature of the ancient giant was so high that Link's ice maker could not resist it, and after melting a large area of water vapor, Link hurriedly avoided the momentum of the flames. Quickly went around behind the ancient giant. Cut your neck. However, the neck of the ancient giant, like an owl, turned straight and spit fire after Link. Link flapped his wings, flew up into the sky, and stabbed down quickly, stabbing into the skull of the ancient giant. Link instantly felt the huge heat rising, and the ancient giant sneered, "Are you tickling my scalp?" Tony shook his head and said, "Link's weapon is too short. It's like an ant's teeth to the ancient giant." Watching Link rush into the air again, his coat was already burning. The ancient giant was spewing fire everywhere. The high temperature steamed the clouds above his head, and a light rain fell. Tony looked at the Iron Giant who was lying on the ground. His chest was crushed, and he was struggling to stand up. Tony shouted, "Jarvis, give our Arbiter's Sword to Link." Chapter 164 The Arbiter's Sword. Link and the Ancient Giant were fighting fiercely. The Ancient Giant sprayed everywhere, and Link flew around. Neither of them could do anything to the other. However, under close observation, Link could feel that the power of the Ancient Giant was still slowly increasing. The red light spots flying out of the magma pool were also becoming more and more dense. The sound of dragon roars came from time to time, and there was a hint of loneliness in the sound. It can be seen that Oolong's vitality was almost completely absorbed by the Ancient Giant. When Oolong died, what would it be like when the Ancient Giant was truly resurrected? Link couldn't imagine it at all. He didn't know about this extinct prehistoric monster. But at this moment, the Ancient Giant was strong enough, and once it became a complete form, his horror would be unbearable. After Tony gave the order to Jarvis, the Iron Giant began to decompose. Zelda asked curiously, "What is the Arbiter's Sword? Is it a new weapon you developed?" Tony smiled and said, "Just look at it. This is a sword I made. It can allow the user to gain the same level of strength as Link. And now I plan to give this sword to Link." The steel giant began to transform rapidly, gradually turning into a mechanical giant sword. It was 30 meters long and 3 meters wide, without a blade or edge. It seemed that the hilt was almost invisible. In order to hold it, Princess Washan looked at Tony as if she was watching a financial expert talking about military affairs and said, Link can only lift this sword at most, but he can't swing it at all. Tony smiled and said, he doesn't need to swing the sword. This is a magic sword prepared for ordinary people. The thrusters on the Arbiter's sword started, and it stabbed like an aircraft carrier. Tony shouted, Link, hold my body, that I worked hard for more than 30 years, and kill this bastard. The ancient giant could not tolerate Tony helping Link, and reached out to grab the arbitration sword. But the sword seemed to have eyes, and it turned quickly, avoiding the grasp of the ancient giant, and fell into Link's hand. Link grabbed the hilt, which was extremely small compared to the blade. Jarvis' voice rang in his ears, Link, welcome to the Arbiter's sword. I will judge the direction, based on the state of your hand. The blade is driven by more than 50 thrusters, and you can easily pick it up with just a little effort. The ancient giant shouted. A fly took a toothbrush and wanted to agree to me. Shut up. Tony shouted, Link, just for this sentence, kill this bastard. The ancient giant stretched out his fist and hit Link. And Link also knew it, and raised his sword high. Infuse power into it. Awakened Arkle. Let's fight. Brother. Feel free to use my power. Awakener Zappo. This disgusting mud reminds me of Ganon. Purify him with lightning. Link poured Arkle's great power and Zappo's thunder power into the Arbiter's greatsword. For a moment, the Arbiter's sword was full of lightning. Because it was too close to the sky, a bolt of lightning struck the sword. Thor, who was fighting for peace in the Nine Realms, suddenly felt a touch in his body and found that the hammer seemed to resonate with him. Thor looked up at the sky. Is Link fighting with some powerful enemy? My father's guess was right. There are more and more powerful enemies on Earth. More than 30 arc reactors on the Arbiter's sword lit up immediately. Link shouted loudly and swung down. Crack. It was a shock. The Arbiter's sword slashed out a wide sword beam about 60 meters long, and the sword beam emitted strong chaotic lightning. The air within a kilometer around was agitated by this sword energy. If it was slashed in the sea, it would be enough to set off terrible waves and cover the huge pit of the magma sea of fire. The sword energy broke through the air, and a huge ship came in the strong wind and waves, and hit the ancient giant's hand fiercely, and it was cut in two. Link flew to the ancient giant at high speed, and began to spin with the Arbiter's greatsword, which was full of lightning. Circle after circle, the greatsword danced like a Ferris wheel, fiercely cutting into the ancient giant's abdomen, and forcibly cutting it in two. This is not the end. Link's spinning slash did not stop, but continued to rush forward with a spiral mark, cutting the huge ancient giant into pieces. Wherever the sword went, the ancient giant's body made of magma could not form any obstacles. Oh my god. Link is showing his power. He cut the ancient giant's body. Still cutting. Still cutting. Come on. Don't let him revive again. Come on. Link. The reporter shouted out his signature broken voice. The audience, who were concentrating on watching the battle in front of the TV, did not forget to turn down the TV sound again when the battle was so fierce that they opened their mouths and dazed. The last blow. Link jumped into the air, aimed at the head of the ancient giant, and chopped it down with a sword. Boom. Crack. The skull of the ancient giant split in the middle. He didn't even have time to make a sound, and the magma scattered all over the sky and fell heavily to the ground. Link gasped, retreated to a safe area, and stepped on the air to observe the remains of the ancient giant. It seemed that Link's suspicions were confirmed. The magma sea of fire churned again, and more red light and huge amounts of magma gushed out, rushing towards the body of the ancient giant. Link rushed between the magma sea of fire and the remains of the ancient giant, trying to resist. But these pure energies and magma bypassed his body one after another, and began to quickly repair the body of the ancient giant, as if time was going backwards. Oh my god. What's going on? Link chopped him into that state. How can he still be resurrected? The reporter covered his head and screamed. When Link was feeling a little helpless, Zelda pointed at the sea of magma and shouted. Her tender voice came from afar. Link. I saw it with a bird. Oolong seems to be stained with Ganon pollution and cursed eyeballs. If Oolong is not rescued, the ancient giant will continue to revive with Oolong's vitality. Link wanted to rush into the magma immediately to rescue Oolong, but the ancient giant was reviving quickly. What if he was still in the magma and the ancient giant took this opportunity to hunt Tony and the two princesses? He finally understood that the ancient giant kept walking around the sea of magma in order to absorb Oolong's life force. With such a big body, one step can cross a football field. Even if Zelda and others use Iron Man and the bird, they can't escape, not to mention the ancient giant's wide-ranging fire attack. At this time, Princess Washang stepped forward and shouted, "Link, give me the Arbiter's sword. You go rescue Oolong, and I'll be responsible for restraining the ancient giant." Zelda was stunned, looked at Princess Washang, and hurriedly said, "This is very dangerous. You don't have Link's fast flying ability." Princess Washang looked back and smiled. "It doesn't matter. Link will rescue Oolong soon. I just need to hold on for a while." Chapter 165 Swimming in the Lava. 8th update. When the ancient giants were wreaking havoc in New York, Banner was enjoying a vacation on a yacht in Miami. After years of fear, he finally had time to rest. He cherished this opportunity. The warm sunshine here reminded Banner of Brazil and his first meeting with Zelda. This cute girl must be staying at home with Link to do experiments, Banner thought. At this time, a speedboat was coming quickly from a distance. Banner was immediately alert, because it was heading straight for Banner. For several years, he relied on this overly sensitive alertness under Ross's close pursuit. The airship stopped directly next to his yacht, and the waves hit Banner's legs, making Banner a little angry. "Who?" As soon as the door opened, Roger's face was revealed. Rogers panted and asked Banner, "Perhaps it's a bit strange to ask you this question as a person from the 1940s, but why don't you bring your communication equipment?" Rogers shook the newly bought Banana 6 in his hand. Since Link and others rescued him, he generously expressed his willingness to give all those who rescued him and Tony a free trial of Banana Company's mobile phone for life. Banner said, "Oh, Captain, you are here for vacation too? I don't like to bring a mobile phone. I don't feel safe. The current technology is forcing everyone to be naked. A mobile phone can't know all your information. Come, let's have a glass of champagne." Rogers laughed and stepped across the boat and entered Banner's yacht. Roger smiled bitterly and said, "How does Tony treat you?" Banner was a little embarrassed. "Very good. He hired me as the chief scientist of Stark Group. He is my boss and gave me a lucky card that I can use up in my lifetime. He is a good man." Roger said, "Since Tony is so good to you, then you know, Tony and Link are fighting an unprecedented monster right now, and they urgently need your and Hulk's help." Banner spread his hands in confusion. "Isn't that right? How long has it been?" "Only a month. Why would a new enemy appear? What's wrong with the Earth?" Roger said, "I want to know too. In our time, it was predicted that the Earth would be destroyed in 1972. And now it is the 21st century, and the Earth has survived for more than 40 years. I think if things continue like this, it will indeed be the end of the world." Rogers showed Banner the video on his phone. Banner was stunned by the huge monster that looked like Godzilla. He said blankly, "This is not scientific. Look at his body. It's so huge. According to the gravity and oxygen content of the Earth, his own weight alone is enough to crush him." The video also showed Link, Tony, and others through dangerous aerial shots. Compared with the ancient giants, they were so small that they could be crushed to death with one foot. Banner regretted, "What did I miss? I should fight. Let's go, Captain. We will go to New York. I'll buy a plane ticket now." Rogers pointed to the sky. "Someone is willing to give us a ride." A fighter plane landed, and the air currents broke Roger's speedboat into pieces, and it fell into the water and floated. The hatch opened, revealing Natasha's beautiful face. She smiled and said, "Gentlemen, who's going back to New York?" Hawkeye also leaned over and shouted, "Let's hurry up. Tony's big and stupid transformer has been defeated." Rogers and Banner hurriedly got into the plane and flew into the sky. Link knew that there was no other choice at the moment, so he handed the 30-meter long weapon to the Washang princess in a particularly awkward way, then rushed to the edge of the magma pool and jumped down. "Ah!" Tony covered his eyes and shouted, "I dare not look. Is Link cooked?" Zelda shook her head. "He has cold air to protect his body. It's okay, shouldn't it?" She was still a little worried. Roddy was almost roasted by the ancient giant's fire attack, so the impact of Link jumping into the magma alone was much stronger than that of others. Roddy said to himself, if I hadn't knocked Killian away. The fragments on the body of the ancient giant were repaired quickly under the life supply of Orlon. Just like a reverse video, the fragments floated up and reassembled into a human body. The Washan princess waited silently. The ancient giant saw Link jump into the magma and immediately knew what he was going to do. He rushed over quickly, but the Washan princess would naturally not allow the ancient giant to mess around. She raised her long hair, and her dress changed into the appearance of her own battle skirt. The gems on the crown of thorns flashed with light. The Washan princess quickly ran over and slashed with a sword, chopping down the ancient giant. This sword, the Washan princess felt very magical. She didn't understand physics very well, so she didn't know why she could easily lift such a huge thing, but when she wielded it, it was as powerful as an explosion. The ancient giant roared, turned around and glared at the Washan princess with vicious eyes. I remember you. It was you who cut off my arm. The Washan princess did not answer, but rushed forward with her sword horizontally. Even though she was like a moth flying into a flame, her posture was so graceful. Link jumped into the magma and his whole body tensed up. This was not due to the damage caused by the magma, but the human body's instinctive fear of fire. However, due to the protection of the Ice Maker skill, Link easily swam in the magma. Except that the magma made him unable to see anything, and the resistance was very strong. The rest was no different from swimming in water. Link used his flying ability to move quickly downwards. His face was getting redder and redder, not from the temperature, but because Link was moving quickly without breathing. He quickly bumped into a scale, but in the magma, he could not speak, and patted the scale with his hands. Erlang groaned, as if asking Link for help. After finding the dragon's body, Link began to follow Orlon's slender body, looking for the Ganon pollution and cursed eyeballs that were bound to him like parasites. The master sword slashed through, one by one, and 2 or 3 cursed eyeballs were chopped into pieces, shrunken, and then exploded. Link prayed in his heart, Goddess Hylia, bless Princess Washan. Wait for me to get out. The ancient giant stood up, chased Princess Washan and stomped hard, and the ground shook violently. Zelda, Tony and the other two, in order not to cause trouble to the princess, hurriedly hid behind a ruin to watch the battle. The ancient giant shouted, "You are just a little ant. Run. Run again." Princess Washan dodged with a flying body, wielded the Arbiter Greatsword, and slashed the ancient giant's ankle, opening a large gash, but a large amount of magma gushed out. Princess Washan hurriedly wielded the rapier with her other hand, picked up all the gushing magma, and then gently dropped it on the ground. Well, it's good to be healthy. 8 more chapters are completed. Please support. Thanks to Lily Shuping for supporting 900 Kidian coins. Thanks to Wuxin Zhengfeng for supporting 100 Kidian coins. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 166, The Fall of Orlon. Princess Washan quickly fell to the ground and was submerged in the dust. Due to the ancient giant's random stomping, the surface was full of dust. Princess Washan took advantage of the dust to hide her figure, and then suddenly raised her sword and swept across. But even if Princess Washan dodged back and forth, her movement speed was not as fast as that of the ancient giant, and the battle was very strenuous. The ancient giant opened his mouth and spit fire, burning on the ground. Wherever he passed, the steel bars and iron plates all melted into molten iron. The temperature was terribly high, and Princess Washan withdrew and dodged. Tony and others hurriedly ran to a farther place to prevent being hurt by the high temperature. Princess Washan, who was dealing with the ancient giant on the battlefield, was struggling to support herself in the heat. Link was in the magma pool, holding his breath and concentrating to swim quickly, clearing the uncomfortable dense eyeballs on Orlon's body. He was already a little short of oxygen due to his intense actions, and he felt very tired. But time was running out, and he couldn't go up and shout and rush down again. Princess Washan was fighting the ancient giant alone. Her sword skills were suitable for group battles, but she was obviously struggling against this super large monster. If Link delayed for one more second, Princess Washang would be in double the danger. This made Link, the knight who always subconsciously protected the two princesses, very uncomfortable. He wanted to rush back to Princess Washang immediately. Link was not afraid of anything, but he was only worried about the safety of the two princesses. After swimming in the magma for a long time, most of the cursed eyeballs had been cleared. There were many strange fire monsters around, which caused Link a lot of trouble. But when Link followed the dragon's slender body and came to the dragon's head, he took a breath of cold air. The head of Oolong seemed to be buried, covered with a lot of cannon pollution. Except for a pair of dragon horns, no other facial parts could be found. The two dragon horns, which were originally bright and transparent, were now dim, as if they were infected by toxins. A large number of red light spots kept floating out of the cannon pollution, flying into the air, passing through the magma pool, to nourish the body of the ancient giant. Now Oolong was motionless, and Link didn't even know whether Oolong was dead or alive. Link stabbed with his sword with all his strength, trying to pick it up, and the sword tip immediately turned into thousands of swords, piercing into the cannon pollution. The cursed eyeballs were attacked by the sword energy intensively, shrinking and exploding one after another. Suddenly, boom. There was a muffled sound, and the cannon pollution on Oolong's head was completely cleared, but Link's face became even uglier, because the cannon pollution burst like a burst of black smoke, revealing Oolong's head. But the scene in front of Link shocked him. Is it too late? The cannon pollution exploded, and at this moment, it accelerated the deprivation of Oolong's vitality. A large amount of red light, like a dandelion blown by the wind, suddenly exploded and flew above the magma. Oolong was dying, and his pair of bright dragon eyes disappeared, leaving only two bloody black holes. The scales on the dragon's head peeled off, and there were horrible marks like burns everywhere, full of dead air. Oolong was contaminated by Ganon's curse power, and was bound for too long, and his body was severely damaged. Link hurriedly dived down, and patted Oolong's head. Wake up! Link shouted, opened his mouth, and a large mouthful of magma entered, choking Link fiercely. But Oolong seemed to be dead, without any sound. Outside, the ancient giant suddenly felt a strong life energy flying, and his body stagnated for a moment. Princess Washang took this opportunity to suddenly jump up and slash the ancient giant in the air. But a layer of red light film appeared on the surface of the ancient giant's body, and a dragon-shaped figure twisted on it and suddenly stopped. There was a violent vibration, and Princess Washang spit out a mouthful of blood, then took off the clothes on her chest and fell hard on the ground. Link. Princess Washang's arm was dislocated after such a collision, and half of her face was severely scratched. Her golden hair, as soft and bright as silk, was stained with dust and dull. Princess Washang no longer looked at the ancient giant, but looked at the sea of magma and fire. At the same time, Zelda felt a sharp pain on half of her body. Roddy stood aside, and was shocked to find that half of Zelda's face had been covered with blood, since he didn't know when. Tony hurriedly said, Zelda. But Zelda didn't care why she suddenly began to bleed, and her eyes were fixed on the ancient giant who was mutating. The ancient giant roared, I'm resurrected. At first, it was Killian's voice, but in the end, Killian's voice trembled and was terrified, and then the voice turned into an inhuman roar. The mixture of magma and cannon pollution on the ancient giant's body quickly solidified and became one. The head that originally exposed bones was completely covered with cannon pollution, and a red and ferocious mane grew, and two big swords appeared in his hands. The legs closed together, and turned into an organ like the tail of a seahorse, and flew into the air. It was far larger than the largest flying object built by humans, and twice as large. The ancient giant, under the combination of Ganon's pollution and Oolong's vitality, was resurrected. Link, I'm sorry, I can't stop him. Princess Washang fell to the ground with half of her beautiful cheek covered with blood. The ancient giant behind her has been transformed into Ganon's clone by the cursed power, the disaster Ganon Titan. If Link was present at this moment, he would definitely be very familiar with this strange giant. He fought this ferocious enemy 5 times in total. Just when Princess Washang was seriously injured, Link's heart was shaken violently. Without thinking too much, he knew that something had happened to Princess Washang. He could even hear the cry for help from Princess Washang's heart. He patted Oolong hard. Stand up. Cheer up. but Orlon was like dead, without any sign of life. The flesh and blood on his body was being burned by the magma and soon turned into a charred color. Orlon, who controls the power of fire, was burned by magma, which can only mean. Looking at Orlon's miserable appearance, he did not look as handsome as he did when he was floating over the Hyrule continent. Link hugged the dragon horn and whispered in his heart, "I'm sorry, I'm late. They still need my help. Goodbye. I will avenge you." However, the fluctuations from the outside world, the roar of the ancient giant, that could be heard clearly even in the magma, and the unprecedentedly strong momentum of the Ganon curse made Link realize that the enemy he would face was unprecedentedly powerful. Chapter 167 The Hidden Dragon emerges from the abyss. When the disaster Ganon Titan appeared, the sky suddenly darkened. It began to be overcast and drizzle. Everyone nearby began to hear a buzzing sound in their ears, feeling very depressed. The reporter was stunned for a long time when the ancient giant successfully transformed into the disaster Ganon Titan. He didn't know what to say for a while. Not only him, but people all over the world were speechless when they saw this scene. Compared with fear, another emotion made them forget to scream. This was despair. Tony looked at the sky and said to Roddy, "Did you see it? We can't find the sun." Roddy looked up in a trance and looked for the sun in the sky according to Tony's words. Sure enough, at the moment when the disaster Ganon Titan appeared, the sun in the sky disappeared strangely and inexplicably. It was as if the power of Ganon's curse brought the earth to a different world, and the light of the sun that had nourished the earth for billions of years could not be transmitted. In front of Zelda's chest, 3 pyramid-shaped lights suddenly appeared, but the light was very dim. After 100 years of entanglement, Zelda's power of the Holy Triangle has been exhausted. The remaining power was stimulated by the unprecedented accumulation of the power of the Ganon curse on Earth. Zelda rushed towards the Wuxian princess, and she tried to use the last bit of the Holy Triangle to try to give the disaster Ganon giant a final blow. The disaster Ganon giant stepped on the Wuxian princess, and the wounded girl was now submerged by the giant's shadow. Bang! I saw a thing like a green chewing gum in the air, hitting the disaster Ganon giant's face hard. It was so small that it was not even as big as the disaster Ganon giant's nostrils. But the disaster Ganon giant leaned back and was actually knocked back 2 steps by this little guy whose nostrils were not as big as his own. Tony shouted in surprise, "It's the Hulk." A fighter plane flew in the distance, and the rear hatch was still in the open position. Obviously, Hulk jumped out from there just now. Natasha used the detector to search for a long time, but could not find any trace of Link. She was a little suspicious. Could Link be dead? She found the image of the Wuxian princess lying on the ground dejectedly, with blood oozing from the wound on her head, spreading to her soft long hair. For a moment, she didn't know whether she was dead or alive. Natasha thought to herself, Link would never sit back and watch Zelda get injured like this and not do anything. Could it be? Roger said in a deep voice, "We must believe in Link. He has always been the strongest and bravest one. Attack Titan." Hawkeye looked at the disaster Ganon Titan coldly and said, "He destroyed everything here. Let's destroy him too." The fighter plane flew down and launched attacks on the disaster Ganon Titan continuously. The Hulk madly beat the disaster Ganon Titan with both hands, and a piece of his skull was smashed off by the huge force. However, what appeared from the broken head was not brain matter, but cannon pollution like rolling caramel, which rushed out all of a sudden and surrounded the Hulk's whole body. The Hulk screamed and fell heavily to the ground. His body was covered with a lot of Ganon pollution. The crown of the Wuxian princess fell off, and her hair was disheveled. Suddenly, there was a shock, and a ball of Ganon pollution fell to the side. It seemed that someone was wrapped in it, struggling desperately. The Wuxian princess's dominant hand was severely dislocated. She had difficulty moving, and her whole body was in pain. But she still summoned her only strength, summoned the royal sword, and struggled to draw a sword energy, like a white dove passing by, and cut the ball of Ganon pollution. Zelda's power is the most restrained against Ganon pollution. Just a sword energy gently touched the Ganon pollution, and this ball of mud-like asphalt was stirred, as if it was boiling. Finally, it exploded and a lot of black smoke came out. Oh. Hulk jumped out, looked at the tall Ganon with hatred, and said awkwardly to the Wuxian princess, Thank you. He bent his legs, tightened his muscles, and tore his pants, and flew up like a flea, hitting the Ganon fiercely. Zelda ran up to help the Washan princess up. Both of them were covered in blood, very miserable. The Washan princess smiled and said, I think we should clean it up before Link comes out, otherwise Link will go crazy when he sees us like this. Zelda also smiled. That's right. As for Link, when he was about to leave, Oolong let out a sob, and the whole magma pool was shaking. It was begging Link to save him. Link turned his head suddenly, and Oolong was not dead, which gave him a great surprise. But thinking that he had no ability to save this dragon from Hyrule, Link's mood darkened again. He couldn't bear to leave like this, so he hugged Oolong's dragon horn again, and said in his heart, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Mipha's recovery ability can only work on Link himself, and cannot be used on others. But then, he thought of something. His eyes suddenly lit up. He hurriedly took out the life durian from his small space. As soon as the life durian was taken out, it was baked by the surrounding magma, and turned into a roasted durian. This simple dish can add 4 or 5 grids of vitality to Link. What if it is given to Oolong? No one in the world has fed the 3-headed dragon, and Link doesn't know whether Oolong can eat the life durian. But he thinks he needs to try it. The roasted life durian is still being baked by the magma. If it waits a little longer, it will turn into ash. So Link groped and came to Oolong's mouth. Oolong's mouth was also severely corroded, revealing teeth as big as explosion-proof doors. Link knocked on Oolong's teeth. Oolong seemed to know what Link was going to do, and opened his mouth obediently. He sucked in a large amount of magma at once, and the life durian also flowed into Oolong's mouth along the water flow. Oh. Link looked at Oolong expectantly as he ate the life durian. Suddenly, 2 flames gathered on Oolong's blind eye sockets, forming a pair of dragon eyes with vicissitudes. Oolong began to swim, and put Link on his head. It worked. Link was very happy. Then he felt Oolong swimming violently, and climbing out of the magma. The sound of the dragon's roar resounded throughout the world. At this moment, the Hulk was thrown down by the disaster cannon tightened again, and the fighter plane was destroyed by the flames of the giant, and Rogers and the other 2 parachuted to escape. For a while, there was no opponent on the field who could fight the disaster cannon titan. Everyone was waiting for a hero to appear. Then, the hidden dragon emerged from the abyss. Chapter 168 Dragon Rider. Rogers was in the sky, parachuting down with 2 other agents. Rogers said depressedly, I've always thought that parachutes are a stupid invention. Aren't we just sitting ducks? Hawkeye was also floating in the sky unhappy, and said to Rogers, Captain, you have to think clearly. Being a sitting duck is better than staying in a fighter plane and waiting to be crushed into a pulp when it falls. Natasha obviously didn't want to talk to the 2 men. She was trying to contact Nick, but the connection was not working. Because Nick was arguing with the World Security Committee. Use a nuclear bomb. Use a nuclear bomb. Blow up that monster. Nick was distressed. Can you please not use a nuclear bomb every time something happens? There are still many innocent residents there. If you don't use a nuclear bomb, it will only hurt more innocent people. Use a nuclear bomb. Use a nuclear bomb. Nick slammed the table. You must know that the last time you didn't listen to my advice and forcibly used a nuclear bomb, you know the consequences. This is a different time. Use a nuclear bomb. Use a nuclear bomb. Nick straightly pulled a long face and began to threaten the members of the World Security Committee. Listen carefully. Here are Link's original words. You dare to use a nuclear bomb when they are fighting. He will throw a nuclear bomb at you. The World Security Committee has a lot of information about Link, knowing that he has saved the world many times and has shielded against nuclear bombs. Such a powerful and uncontrollable person, they hate and fear. So he said in a very straightforward and soft tone, then, we can use nuclear bombs when he has no other options, okay? Nick slapped his face. He had a headache just like hearing about Tyrion when he heard about nuclear bombs. Natasha couldn't contact Nick and suddenly saw the magma pool that had sunk a lot, churning again. Pointing there, she shouted, look, what happened? Hawkeye's face was dark. As long as it's not another monster. Everyone's face turned pale. Except for Zelda. No one present had ever heard the roar of a dragon. This sound was similar to the roar of an elephant, and it was extremely penetrating. Even on the other side of the earth, merchant ships sailing on the surface of the Indian Ocean could clearly hear this long roar that seemed to penetrate the soul. Natasha scolded, "Barton, can you say something nice?" A long red creature emerged from the magma. Even without wings, it still relied on some magical power to soar into the sky and hover in the sky. Natasha pondered, "Is this a Chinese dragon?" Roger's serious face suddenly became happy, and he shouted, "Look, it's Link." Natasha was puzzled and was very confused about Roger's behavior of pointing at the snake and saying Link. But Hawkeye's vision soon saw Link standing on the top of Oral's head and laughed. "Oh my god. What did Link run out with?" Nick, who was watching the video in the temporary combat meeting room, was also stunned. Soon he received a call from the World Security Committee, which made him frown again. "Oh my god. Another monster appeared. Use nuclear bombs. Use nuclear bombs. Get out." Nick was completely enraged. He yelled and hung up the phone fiercely. Tony looked at the alien hovering in the air and breathed a sigh of relief. He sat on the stone slab with Roddy, who was a little bit suffering from heat stroke, and said with a smile, "Link, this guy has stolen my limelight again this time." Link stood on the dragon head and flew into the air through the magma. The oppression in his chest disappeared at once. He took a deep breath of the outside air and felt refreshed for a while. The Ganon disaster giant in the distance was so shocked that he stood in the air. Link looked down. He was also an archery expert with good eyesight. He first looked down to find the two Zeldas. Then he found the two princesses who were dependent on each other. He could see the dazzling blood color on the bodies of Princess Washang and Zelda clearly, and he could even see the guilty smile on Princess Washang's face. Through this smile, Link could even guess what Princess Washang wanted to say. "I'm sorry, I made you worry. You must be right to think so." As if the blood on the two princesses pierced Link's eyes, Link's face became unusually ferocious, and his eyes were stained with blood. He stared fiercely at the Ganon disaster giant rushing towards him, his face full of murderous intent. If Loki saw Link's face at this moment, he would be scared to faint immediately. Even when Loki did that time, Link had never been so angry because he didn't think he would hurt Zelda at all. But this time, when he rescued Orlon, what kind of battle did the Washang princess go through? He didn't know. Unlike Tony, Link has always been a simple-minded person. He has no obsession, is a man of action, and doesn't like to think too much. Too many thoughts will affect his communication with the goddess Hylia and weaken the sword. But he also has his own obsession, which is to protect Zelda. Link couldn't help but wonder what happened on this battlefield during his absence. The picture of the two princesses supporting each other was like a needle inserted into his pupil. Self-blame and guilt squeezed his heart. Especially the two girls. They would never blame Link for not protecting them well. They would even feel guilty for getting hurt and making Link worry. This thoughtfulness made Link feel even more uncomfortable. Link's usually calm heart couldn't help but become a mess. Orlon was chirping, as if saying something to Link. Link also understood what Orlon meant from this chirping. That did not form a language system. To express gratitude, to defeat Ganon, to fight together, and to ask Link to help him regain his vitality. Although Orin still looked miserable with scattered scales and blood all over his body, Link's life-saving durian finally made Orin breathe a sigh of relief. Looking at the flying disaster cannon giant, his slender body trembled violently, and the few remaining scales were all shaken off by him. The scales floated in the air and quickly condensed into a 50-meter long dragon scale sword. The dragon scale sword suddenly made a sound and flames rose. Link's left hand was empty, and the sword followed Link's left hand and swung. A red light medium allowed Link to infuse the power in his body into the dragon scale sword. The three great dragons are not competitive with the world, and they are not good at fighting. If the super worldly dragon wants revenge, it must rely on Link's power. The disaster cannon giant flew over and slashed at Orin with a two-handed sword. Link also pointed forward, and the dragon scale sword followed Link's will and pointed at the enemy flying in front of him. Chapter 169 Air Combat, 4th update. At this moment, Rogers, Hawkeye, and Natasha were still holding parachutes and slowly sliding down. They had to control it carefully and observe the wind direction with trepidation. After all, the magma sea of fire was very close here. Once they were blown into the magma sea of fire, it would be fun. At this time, the three of them watched Link riding a flying dragon and slashing at the disaster cannon with a sword. Humans are always full of awe for huge things. The flying dragon brought everyone a sense of shock that was no less than the disaster cannon. Moreover, the breath of the alien was different from that of the disaster cannon. It was a peaceful and friendly creature that hovered in the Hyrule continent all year round. Everyone was in awe and loved the three-headed dragon. Except for the blind Link, who often came to knock them a little and was electrocuted by some pharaoh dragons. No one had ever heard of the three huge dragons hurting anyone. Natasha said, "Link, doesn't he always have some strange pets? Horses, big carrots, etc. This oriental dragon, isn't it Link's new pet?" Rogers corrected, "It's not a big carrot, it's Pepper. I feel that not only Link, but even Stark can't afford to feed this dragon. Its daily appetite must be exaggerated." Hawkeye smiled and said, "You are worrying too much. Isn't Link's appetite as big as that of a dragon? Haven't you heard Tony worry about Link's food expenses?" Tony used the visor of the war machine to observe the dragon, watching Link looking majestically at the dragon's head. He immediately realized that tomorrow's headline would not be about his steel giant. Tony sighed, "Congratulations, there is a new species on Earth. A dragon from the east." Roddy rubbed his forehead and groaned. "What did I see? Am I hallucinating? But even if I'm hallucinating, I should see Bruce Lee, not a real dragon, right?" Tony curled his lips. "You are not hallucinating. It is indeed a huge oriental dragon that looks like a snake." The reporter was also lying on the ruins. When he saw the little Link riding a huge dragon soaring in the sky, he regained his passion for commentary. "Link again. It's him again. Our son of God has returned to the battlefield with his big surprise." In the temporary combat meeting room, Nick asked depressedly, "Why is Link called the son of God?" Carlson on the side smiled a little proudly and said, "This is what I did. I gave him a new name. Elf Link sounds a bit weird." Nick glared at Carlson. "What do you want?" Carlson explained to Nick seriously, "Think about it. The society lacks a clear positioning for Link, and Link never appears in front of the media to guide. Over time, his image in front of the public will be distorted one-sidedly, which will lead to misunderstandings of Link by the public, which will cause great harm. So I took the initiative to help Link promote his image positively." Hill, who knew the whole process of Carlson's actions, exposed Carlson mercilessly. "This guy has become a fanatical fan of Link recently and is helping Link to build momentum, just like the government built momentum for Rogers back then." Nick. Carlson coughed. Look. Link and the giant are fighting." In the screen, Link wielded the dragon scale sword, and even through the screen, he could feel a strong sense of shock. Link directly summoned Darkle and poured huge power into the dragon scale sword, and the fire on it was even more dazzling. The disaster cannon giant also chopped over, and the blade was also filled with a lot of fire. This is a contest of fire and fire. Bang. Both weapons were incredibly huge, and when they clashed, it was as terrifying as the sky falling and the earth collapsing. All of New York could hear the sound of clang of weapons clashing. Link took advantage of Orlon's momentum and Darkle's gear and tribe's strange strength to gain a slight advantage, knocking the giant one-handed sword away a little. Link was also shocked all over. After all, his body was too small, and he was not at an advantage in such a pure power confrontation. He still forced himself to stabilize his body, put away his sword, and took advantage of the gap in front of the disaster cannon giant to send a sword forward and stab the disaster cannon giant's chest. But the disaster cannon giant also swung the giant one-handed sword in his other hand. It bounced the dragon scale sword away. The blade of the dragon scale sword left a long mark in front of the disaster cannon giant. A dragon and a giant crossed each other in the air. Link took advantage of a little. Many red spots of light began to appear on the wounds of the disaster cannon giant and flew into Orlon's body. The burnt, corroded, and broken wounds on Orlon's huge body began to slowly repair. A long roar. The dragon's roar was filled with the pleasure of revenge. It was the first time in the creation of the world that a gentle and peaceful dragon could be so angry. A dragon and a giant, like knights in a duel, turned around and charged at each other again. Link had never experienced such a strange fight, but he was very good at fighting on horseback, so he swept away with another sword. Link's hatred for the disaster cannon giant was no less than Orlon's. Clang! Link spat out a mouthful of blood, and a strong force came from the dragon scale sword. Before, they were evenly matched and had the upper hand, but at this moment, Link was defeated. Link struggled to spin and slash, turned around, and slashed the back of the disaster Ganon giant with his backhand, exploding a large area of Ganon pollution and ends red light spots like a swarm of bees, the vitality of Auron. The red light spots flew into Auron's body. In order to help Link make weapons that can fight in the air, all the scales on its body were removed, and its body was bare, but now the scales began to grow again. Auron and the disaster Ganon giant staggered their bodies and flew away in a hurry. This time, it did not turn around and rush forward at the first time, but hovered in the air and whispered to ask about Link's status. Link shook his head. He used the power of thunder to disperse the curse power that was transmitted into his body through the dragon scale sword. Just now, the disaster Ganon giant instantly released a large amount of curse power, broke through the defense of the dragon scale sword, and pierced into Link's body. It caused him a lot of trouble. Fortunately, there is Urzabo's thunder power, which can help him purify the unclean power. Mipha appeared behind Link, stretched out two small hands, and helped Link repair the damage in his body. It will be fine soon. Link smiled and swallowed the remaining blood in his throat. The setback in the confrontation only aroused Link's strong will to fight. Orlon, let's go. The third round, the battle begins. Chapter 170 Reversal, 5th update. Link drove Orlon forward again. This time he summoned not only Darkle, but also Urzapo. The flame on the dragon scale sword instantly turned blue and white, and dense electric light coiled on it, like a cat's tail with its fur blasted. Boom. The two behemoths collided in the air again. Urzapo and Darkle each put a hand on Link's shoulder, giving Link maximum strength. Link could not bear the damage caused by the huge amount of energy infusion in his body. His body began to tremble, and his face flushed. Mipha also floated over affectionately, hugged Link's head, closed his eyes, and helped Link repair the damage that rushed out of his body. The power of the curse of the Ganon disaster giant was thrown from the blade, constantly attacking the dragon scale sword, but it was soon blocked by the power of thunder. Two completely different attribute powers collided and devoured each other, and Link was not at a disadvantage this time. With the full help of the three heroes, Link pushed the sword hard. Crack. With the joint efforts of Link and the three heroes, the giant one-handed sword of the Ganon disaster giant broke with a click, and the broken blade flew up from the sky, spinning at high speed, and falling to the ground, fiercely stabbing near the passionate reporter. The strong electricity it carried was released, and the reporter's hair stood up. Fortunately, his equipment was well protected against electricity, and it was not damaged, and the live broadcast was interrupted. The reporter grinned at the tall sword for a while, and immediately turned his eyes to the battlefield in the air, and saw that Link, riding a dragon, had separated from the Ganon disaster giant again. There was a very deep wound on the waist of the Ganon disaster giant, which was equivalent to 1/3 of the waist width. If it got closer, it might be possible to cut the Ganon disaster giant in half. More red light spots flowed out from the wound, and entered Orlon's body. Orlon let out a long cry, and flew across the sky. His body was recovering to perfection at a rapid speed. His beautiful body reappeared, and the damaged parts of his head and body had been roughly repaired. At first, he was covered with scars and ulcers, which made him look bad, but now that his body has recovered, Orlon immediately formed a sharp contrast with the murderer, the Ganon disaster giant. One was elegant and beautiful, while the other was fierce and vicious. A large amount of Ganon pollution suddenly spurted out from the wound on the waist of the Ganon disaster giant to fill the gap. Although the body was built with the help of Killian's desperate virus and magma, the power of the Ganon curse had already occupied Killian's mind. The crazy and vengeful scientist had already died. The Ganon disaster giant roared, and a large amount of black flames suddenly erupted from his body. In the Ganon pollution mud behind him, Huodi stretched out 4 hands, holding shields, spears and other giant weapons. Link took a deep breath to help himself recover. Orlon chirped in alarm, and he felt that Ganon's power had greatly increased. Link nodded as well. Although he and Orlon worked together, to continuously take back Orlon's life force from the disaster Ganon Titan. The ancient Titan had been completely revived under the combined influence of Orlon's life force and Ganon's curse power. The more Link attacked and deprived the ancient Titan of its life force, the more the Ganon's curse power dominated the ancient Titan's body, and the more vicious the disaster Ganon Titan became. Link gradually seemed to be a little overwhelmed, and the difficulty of the disaster Ganon Titan exceeded his expectations. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to retreat and fear just because of this. Just as he gathered his strength and attacked the disaster Ganon Titan for the fourth time, the disaster Ganon Titan's body rushed over strangely and quickly. Link shouted, "Orlon, get out of the way." A huge body like the ancient Titan looked clumsy, even if it moved very fast. And the disaster Ganon Titan was obviously too fast, just like the ninja of Team Yage. Orlon also felt something was wrong, and tried to dodge by turning his body, but the speed of the Ganon disaster giant was too fast, and it had already rushed to his body, waving its hand, and slashing with its sword. The target of the slash was Orlon's body. Link quickly gathered all his strength, and swung the dragon scale sword to meet it. If he was slower, Orlon might be cut in two. Although it was a dragon, it was still not as good as an earthworm in terms of regeneration ability. Link used a sword to break away the giant sword attacking Orlon, and was in a state of exhaustion. But then a gun stabbed at Link, and the huge gun shaft was thicker than a Chinese dining table. Link hurriedly summoned the Hylian shield. Shield counter, waving his hand and shooting. The giant gun was shaken away and stuck hard into the ground. Link gasped and half knelt on the ground with his shield. Orlon let out a long roar and quickly fled with Link. But Orlon's speed was no match for the abnormal Ganon Titan. It almost teleported and rushed over to hit Orlon. Orlon's body was stiff and its scales were shaking wildly. Even Link on it was almost thrown out. Fortunately, Link held onto a scale tightly. Princess Washang and Zelda met each other and felt the current strange situation. The power of Ganon Titan was strange. With the power of Orlon, there was no way to counter it. Rogers and others fell to the ground and joined Tony and others. At this moment, watching the battle in the sky, several people were very emotional. Orlon roared and tried to distance himself, but Ganon Titan grabbed Orlon's body and raised the sword, knife, and gun from behind and stabbed Link on him fiercely. Orlon shook his head and threw Link off him. Link shouted, "Wait." Then he saw Orlon's body was pierced by the giant weapon of Ganon Titan. Link flew in the sky to stabilize his body, while Orlon, whose body was pierced, looked at Link with his last breath, his huge eyes showing sadness and gratitude. Or's mouth was bleeding, and he called out softly, meaning that Link should leave as soon as possible. Link stared at Or in a daze. His body seemed to melt, and a large number of red light spots representing vitality floated in the air. The anger on Link's face was almost boiling. His body was suddenly stretched and extended, and a new Link was born, standing in the void beside him. It was exactly the same as Link, but the color was darker. Link and the clone drew out the Master Sword at the same time and stabbed each other. Two exactly the same forces gushed out, gathered together, formed a vortex, and began to absorb the power of Link and the clone in reverse. A white hot ball of light appeared between the two. Chapter 171 The Fire of Life. The disaster cannon not only stabbed Orlon with his weapon, but also pulled the weapon, trying to tear Orlon apart. In a hurry, Orlon's painful cry resounded through the sky. Even the clouds were trembling. Time forced Link to come up with a feasible solution as soon as possible to turn the situation around. Link immediately thought of his clone's power. After he obtained this ability, he rarely used it. The power of Link and his clone was absorbed by the terrible light ball they created, and soon became the size of a tree stump. Even now, Link still has no ability to control the light ball. The powerful wave made a strange high frequency sound similar to an explosion. Link and his clone suddenly cut off the energy supply, and the light ball quickly expanded like an out of control red giant. Just when it was about to explode completely, Link took out the Hylia shield and felt the high energy light ball in front of him exploding in all directions. Shield counter. Boom. Waving the Hylian shield, Link seemed to have been touching it for thousands of years and was very familiar with it. He swung the shield as if it were his own fingers. It was easier to perform a perfect shield counter than using other shields. The exploding light ball flew towards the disaster cannon Titan. The light ball was too fast, cutting through the sky as if there was no time process, and was directly stretched and stabbed at the disaster cannon titan. The high brightness of the light ball illuminated Link in blue and white. However, the energy was extremely restrained, and it stabbed towards the same point, the direction of the cannon. Link and the clone looked at each other, and immediately held the Master Sword, and rushed forward quickly. The disaster cannon titan only felt a high purity energy shooting at him, and the speed did not even allow him to react. A ray of light pierced his eyes, and a blood flower burst out from the back of his head, and he continued to fly unstoppably behind him. Link and the clone summoned the power of thunder at the same time, and the lightning on the Master Sword was wrapped around it, just like the running figure of a white horse that was shattered in the water shadow. The two men stabbed the broken eye socket of the disaster cannon giant at the same time, one eye each, and the Master Sword was fiercely inserted into it. The furious thunder force poured out like a waterfall, bombarding the brain of the disaster cannon giant. The body of the disaster cannon giant instantly became numb, trembling and stiff. But Link did not linger in the battle, and took advantage of the opportunity. While the disaster cannon giant was stiff, Link summoned the dragon scale greatsword. Due to the serious injury of Oolong, the dragonfly greatsword also lost its usual blazing flames. That is, the dense dragon scales on it were much dimmer at this moment. Raising the dragon scale greatsword, under the simultaneous infusion of power by the two Links, the original red flame of the greatsword was replaced by a very terrifying circle of electric light. Zzzz. The dragon scale greatsword exuded a terrifying momentum, as if any living thing would be shattered under this extremely powerful sword. From the dragon scale greatsword, there was even a high-pitched dragon cry, as if under Link's full urging. The power and characteristics of the dragon were also stimulated in the face of this great enemy. Bang! The sword slashed on the giant weapon of the disaster cannon giant. Due to the fast speed, the power was fully exerted on the two Links. Everything that was cut off could not stop the swing of the dragon scale sword to the end. Whether it was a giant spear, a giant sword, or any other weapon, they all broke under Link's slash. Link shouted, "Alang, run!" Oolong let out a low cry, and Link's fluctuations in the air instantly decreased, as if his power was sucked by a black hole. Oolong knew that this was Link's all-out effort to save him from the disaster cannon giant. Now Link is estimated to be seriously overdrawn, and I'm afraid that he will not be able to exert his fighting power for a while. The dragon did not want to let Link down. Although Link cut off all the weapons inserted in Oolong, it was still fatally injured, and had difficulty swimming. Oolong roared with all his might, forcing his wounded body to fly away quickly. But he saw that the blinded Ganon giant slapped Link in a panic. Under the huge palm, Link's tired little body was shrouded in shadow. Link also saw it, and he tried his best to fly away, but after the high intensity output, it was already difficult for Link to maintain his flying posture. How could little Link block such a heavy blow? Oolong let out a long hiss, and the sound was already a little exhausted. A gentle dragon breath spurted out, blowing away Link and the dragon scale sword. Oolong is a dragon that represents peace. Since Link risked his life to save him, he was naturally ready to save Link. Oolong's body began to burn with flames. The flames were strangely strong, and a lot of blood spurted out of the wounds on Oolong's body, just like spreading a few wings, and the blood flowers turned into a piece of fire in the air. Link fell heavily to the ground, and the sight of Oolong almost burning himself made him open his eyes wide. He knew what Oolong wanted to do, but he couldn't say anything for a while, because he was exhausted, and couldn't do anything. The Hulk jumped up quickly and caught Link, so that Link's body would not fall to the ground. Link's eyes were full of pain, and he never left Oolong in the sky. Oolong's eyes also burned with fire, and his two eyes were blinded again in an instant. He is the dragon in charge of the power of fire. Fire needs firewood to burn. This time, Oolong is burning the fire of life. That is, his own body. The blind Oolong seemed to have returned to the vast Hyrule continent in an instant, flying freely in the clear sky. His body felt the flame of his own life, as if his body had not been destroyed by Ganon pollution, and was still a healthy body that could live for thousands of years, flying comfortably against the wind. Zelda clasped her hands in front of her chest, watching Oolong burning all over, and looked at the Washan princess in fear. Could it be? Is he going to die with the disaster Ganon Titan? Orlon roared. His voice became extremely sharp because of hoarseness. He violently knocked away the arm of the disaster Ganon Titan, and then quickly wrapped around it like a python, and the fire of life burned the disaster Ganon Titan. The giant roared wildly, and his entire body was instantly ignited by the fire of life. His whole body continued to dissolve in this fatal high temperature, even if he was from magma. What's more terrifying is that because his body has absorbed a lot of Orlon's vitality, it resonates with the external Orlon and burns together. Two huge creatures were entangled with each other, and the fire lit up the whole world. Chapter 172 Risking Life. Hulk cried out in a muffled voice, because Link, who was lying in his arms, was trembling slightly. Link had beaten Hulk several times, and Hulk knew how strong Link was. He could feel that Link's body was in an extremely weak state. Mipha also floated out, looking at Link worriedly, lowering her eyes, and whispered, "I'm sorry, I can't replenish your strength." Hulk poked Mipha curiously, but her thick fingers went through Mipha's head. Mipha was a little scared when she saw the big monster, and she turned around and hid beside Link. Hulk rumbled in his throat with a little dissatisfaction. Link tried to stand up, and Mipha supported Link, although it was useless, and hurriedly said, "Be careful." Before he finished speaking, Link slammed his knee on the ground, his shoulders heaving with fatigue, and at the same time, used his clone to exert double the strength. The backlash of the lack of energy in his body made Lin Zong feel indescribably uncomfortable, as if he didn't even have the strength to breathe. He looked up and saw Orlon entangled with the giant, and the two huge creatures were entangled together. Link gritted his teeth and said, "I should go and help it." Mipha could understand the pain in Link's heart, because she was in pain herself. Why couldn't she help Link at such an important time? So she hugged Link's shoulders and pressed her body against her sweetheart. Hulk looked at the giant in the sky with hatred. This guy threw him down twice. Hulk remembered this grudge. Link was extremely frustrated at this moment. The lost mood drove Hulk, making Hulk more angry for his companions. He roared and was about to jump up and fight the disaster Ganon giant to the death. But Link hurriedly called out, "Hulk, you don't have to go. The fire of life, once lit, cannot be extinguished. You will burn if you touch it. Moreover, Orlon will definitely defeat the Ganon giant." Hulk scratched his head in confusion and said, "The dragon is not strong." Although Hulk was simple-minded, he was very sensitive. He had long seen that Orlon was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. Although his body was scary, his fighting ability was weak. Even worse than Hulk. Hulk didn't think Orlon could defeat the disaster Ganon Titan. Link shook his head. "No. Orlon is very weak, but this time, he won't lose. When a dragon gives up his eternal life and tries to fight to the death, he can't fail." Above the sky, Orlon entangled the disaster Ganon Titan fiercely. Then he opened his mouth wide and bit the neck of the disaster Ganon Titan with his broken teeth. This was Orlon's first battle in countless years. He was unfamiliar with it. His teeth were neither used for eating nor for biting prey. Although his dragon claws were strong, he had never killed before. He was shot down by Link, who was weak at the time. His body was not good at fighting at all, but at this moment, he had to learn to fight. The detached dragon learned to entangle like a low-level python, and learned to clumsily bite the disaster Ganon Titan. The disaster Ganon Titan was burning crazily, and the Ganon pollution on his body was like boiling black oil, burning under the fire of life. Moreover, because he devoured a large amount of Orlong's vitality, the power that belonged to Orlong in his body became the catalyst for his body's destruction, so that the fire of life could easily burn through his body. The disaster Ganon giant was crazy and bit Orlong's body. The two giant creatures, a pair of mortal enemies, entangled in the air and bit each other. In addition to the raging flames on the outer layer, a fierce beast and a dragon fought in the most primitive way, and the dragon's body was quickly disintegrated. His teeth had been corroded by Ganon and fell off, but his mouth was pressed hard against the giant's neck. At this moment, Orlong was no longer as handsome as before, just like a poisonous snake that chose its prey. Seeing such a peaceful dragon become like this, Link, Mipha, Zelda, and other Hyrule people who had seen Orlong's former appearance were all very sad. The whole world was watching the two beasts fighting quietly. In less than a minute, both the Calamity Cannon and Orlong were seriously injured. Especially Orlong. The giant's hand was tearing Oolong's body, and the weapon wound on Oolong's back tore a large piece. It was like a broken red scarf. Both sides suffered serious damage. This kind of battle, because there was no light and big attacks, seemed very primitive and clumsy, but it was this kind of primitive battle that abandoned everything. That seemed extremely shocking. Even Rogers, Natasha and others who were used to the wind and rain were so nervous that they forgot to breathe while watching the battle from a distance. Link kept using the power of thunder to stimulate his body and recover his combat power as soon as possible. He couldn't sit back and watch Oolong endure such a painful battle. Bang! The earth cracked with a shocking sound. The two giant beasts, both of which lost the ability to fly, fell from the air and fell heavily to the ground, shaking the ground. Under their bodies, a long crack appeared, which happened to lead to the sea of magma and fire. A large amount of magma poured in from the big crack. The giant roared, the dragon howled. The two rolled on the ground, and the ground shook violently, as if the earth was also afraid of the fight between the two. Swish! There was a paralyzing sound of flesh being torn apart. Link shouted, "No!" He ignored his own escape and rushed forward with the sword, but before he took 3 steps, the Master Sword was heavily stuck in the ground, and half of the sword was gone. Link's strength at this moment was no longer enough to use the Master Sword. Zelda covered her eyes and hid in the arms of the Wuxian princess, sobbing softly. The Wuxian princess also looked at the dragon with pity. The teeth of the disaster Ganon giant tore open Oolong's neck, and blood spurted wildly, spraying towards New York City. Link's hair was also dyed red by the blood rain that erupted. A faint warm fragrance spread in the air. This is the smell of Oolong's blood. Oolong's head softened for a moment, and his mouth full of blood was still trembling faintly. His eyes were bloodshot, staring at the sky blankly. Damn it. Link took back the Master Sword, leaned on Mistin, gritted his teeth, and walked over step by step. Tony also rubbed his brows and shouted with Jarvis in the armor of War Machine, "How many parts of the Arbiter's sword are still usable?" Rogers took the shield from his back and said in a deep voice, "This is our battle." Natasha looked at the dragon filled with death and shook her head. The Wuxian princess looked at the power of the Holy Triangle in her hand and was ready for the final battle. Everyone present did not have any luck at this moment. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 173 Life and Death. Third update. Roar, roar, roar. The disaster Ganon giant roared to the sky and tore off the body of Oolong that was wrapped around his body. The life fire on his body suddenly disappeared. Although the disaster Ganon giant also suffered heavy losses, it was burned all over, with no intact place, and was riddled with holes. Even his eyes, which were blinded by Link, were gurgling with Ganon pollution. But he won the final victory in this desperate battle. After all, Oolong was an auspicious dragon that was not good at fighting, and he could not defeat the ancient giant blessed by the power of Ganon's curse. The disaster Ganon giant, shaking his severely burned body, crawled towards Link. And Link did not retreat. It had come to this point. It didn't matter whether he escaped or not. Link's eyes could not leave the disaster Ganon giant until he died. The two princesses ran towards Link. Link forced a smile and said, "Don't worry, the disaster Ganon Titan is already at the end of its strength. I can defeat him." Princess Wuxian supported Link, and Zelda looked at him, opened her little hand, and the golden Triforce of the gods inside was glowing faintly. Zelda whispered, "I still have a little bit of Triforce left. Maybe I can defeat the disaster Ganon Titan." Link looked at Zelda. "If you use up this little Triforce, do you think you can still survive?" Zelda was speechless, but Link looked at the pitiful remains of Oolong, and then looked at the disaster Ganon Titan, who had gone crazy and lost his mind and was crawling towards him. Link said, "This is the unfinished battle between Oolong and me, and I will end it." Then he felt that his tone to Zelda was too harsh, so he smiled at Zelda and said, "Don't I always do this?" The disaster Ganon Titan roared, and the sound waves directly knocked several people down, and a large number of cracks appeared on the ground again. Suddenly, a voice shouted to Link, You lied to Hulk. Then the green figure roared and rushed towards the disaster cannon giant with anger on his ferocious face. Link lied to Hulk. All-on didn't beat the giant at all. Hulk jumped up suddenly and punched the disaster cannon giant fiercely. The power of the angry Hulk was unreasonable. Bang! He directly smashed the head of the disaster cannon giant to one side. Then Hulk slapped his chest and rushed up again. He jumped and punched the head of the disaster cannon giant, smashing it hard and punching it crazily. The disaster cannon giant roared repeatedly, and his body suddenly released a dark light. A large amount of Ganon pollution sprayed on the Hulk and wrapped him up. The Hulk struggled in the mud, and then the disaster cannon giant opened his mouth and swallowed Hulk into his stomach. Link, Zelda and others were shocked. Tony yelled, "Don't eat anything. Spit out my friend, Jarvis. When can the Arbiter's sword be restarted?" After the disaster cannon giant ate Hulk, he wanted to kill Link and Zelda. Even though his eyes were destroyed, he knew the breath of the hero and the princess, and the power of the Ganon curse. However, his body suddenly made a loud noise, and his stomach shook violently. Rogers just ran over and looked at the disaster cannon giant, holding his stomach and curling up. There was a strange guess. Could it be Hulk is making trouble in the giant's stomach? Hawkeye said, "It's very likely. After all, it's Hulk." Although the disaster cannon giant won the battle with Orlon, but his body was severely destroyed, and he was severely burned from the inside to the outside. Hulk's vitality is extremely tenacious. After eating, he struggled in the stomach of the disaster cannon giant, destroying his body from the inside. If he was in his prime, Hulk would be killed by the Ganon curse in 3 seconds after swallowing Hulk. But now, the body of the disaster Ganon giant was roasted by the fire of life. The large amount of life flames made the curse power in the body of the disaster Ganon giant reach a new low. Just like an ordinary person who was hit by nuclear radiation, his body was irreversibly rotten and disintegrated. This was his weakest time. "This is an opportunity," Link shouted, and his whole body was full of lightning, and he was in great pain. The electric current penetrated his body, and the cells in his body gained strength briefly under the stimulation of electricity. But this behavior seriously overdraws Link's health. But he doesn't care. Anyway, there is Mipha to help him with treatment. Link broke free from the Washan princess and flew away desperately. But the first thing he did was not to find trouble with the disaster Ganon giant, but to bypass the giant's palm and swung, and came to the dragon scale sword that fell on the ground, stretched out his hand, and tried to control the dragon scale sword. "Please, Oolong, help me." Link looked at the remains of Oolong. A lot of blood was flowing on the ground, like a lake, and there were 2 bloody eyeballs on the dragon's head, and waves of sadness surged in his heart. The disaster cannon giant roared wildly and pounced on Link in the air. The dull dragon scale sword on the ground seemed to have died with its owner. The disaster cannon giant roared incoherently, "Dead Link, kill." The giant palm pressed down and swung towards Link. Although the strength of the disaster cannon giant was greatly reduced, Link at this moment was still invincible to resist the giant's attack. At this moment, suddenly, a dragon roar came from the invisible place. Ouch. Hearing the familiar and hateful voice, the disaster cannon giant subconsciously put away his hand and curled up his body. The charred body was still scattering debris. Link looked around in confusion and saw that the remains of the Oolong and the blood on the ground suddenly turned into energy light particles, like a dandelion carried by the wind, floating on the dragon scale sword. The rough sword blade, which was originally composed of dragon scales, was reshaped and shrunk under the power generated by the remains. It turned into a 2-meter long sword that Link could hold. It was red all over, and the hilt was made of a red dragon coiled around it, which was extremely beautiful. It was red all over, like a whole piece of red jade. Rather than a weapon, it was more like a work of art that was suitable for careful collection in a museum. The dragon scale sword flew up again and fell into Link's hands. At the moment when Link held the hilt of the sword, a gentle force was transmitted to his body. It was as if an alien suddenly flew out of the sword and crashed into Link. In Link's heart, a will beyond language came. "Take care of it, my child." Link was stunned. But then the disaster cannon giant rushed over again. Link had no time to think about anything else, and his eyes turned back to the disaster cannon giant. His battle with the alien was not over yet. Holding this great sword made of the remains of the Orlean, he held it with both hands and pointed at the cannon giant from a distance. Next round, fight again. Chapter 174 Fireworks. Fourth update. Link knew that he might lose strength again at any time, so he went all out to fight again. This one strike, either you die or I die. Orlan's impact on Link's will to make a last wish deeply stimulated Link. And this is exactly what Link needed. He needed stimulation, to let his anger support this exhausted body, to support the swinging of the dragon scale sword in his hand, to support Link to use up his last bit of strength to defeat Ganon's curse power, and let the deprived sunlight reappear in this bright winter day. Link shouted, his eyebrows stood up, and the anger in his eyes almost materialized. He raised the dragon scale sword high, swung it and chopped it, pouring all his strength into it and swaying it. Ganon, the disaster giant, was in great pain because of the Hulk's disruption in his body. But feeling Link's awesome fighting power, a large black light burst out from his body and rushed towards Link. He knew that Link only had this one strike left, and even if his body was overdrawn, it would not allow Link to swing the second sword. Both sides were fighting for their lives. Link did not hold back at all and threw himself into the attack. He did not think about defense, what to do if he was injured, or what to do after defeat. He just focused all his energy on the attack. The more he concentrated, the clearer the dragon roar he heard in his heart became. Link knew that this was the last echo of Orlan's life, a sound that only Link could hear. From the dragon roar, he felt Orlan's encouragement and blessing for him. This kind of pure and peaceful life fought an extremely difficult battle with Link at the last moment of his life. Even after death, he did not forget to transform his bones into a sword for the brave, and gave up everything in his life to fight side by side with Link. When a dragon gives up his eternal life and attempts to fight to the death, he cannot fail. Link still remembered what he said. Crack. A strong flame burst out from the dragon scale sword, and a flaming sword light rushed out, like a sun on the seashore, breaking through the horizon. The power of the curse could hardly stop the flame sword even a little bit. Link immediately broke through the dark light and came to the disaster giant. The body of the disaster giant Ganon was charred at this moment, and a strong smell of burning came out. At least 1/3 of its body had been ignited and burned by the fire of life in the battle with Orlan. At this moment, it was like a broken fortress, and the only thing missing was the last fire to ignite and completely destroy it. Burn all the filth in the shadow corners. Shock. Link chopped down fiercely, and the arm of the disaster giant Ganon broke with a sound, turning into a ball of black wind in the air. Link's sword force did not decrease. He couldn't reduce it, even if he wanted to, and his own strength could not take back this attack. This time, the sword slash was destined to go without return. The disaster giant Ganon finally panicked and screamed. But Link would not have mercy on anyone, and he would not have mercy on Ganon's puppet. Link and the sword blade were like an eagle swooping down on its prey, and slashed it with one sword. The sword blade exuded high temperature, and wherever it passed, it was like slashing into oil. The head of the disaster cannon was cut in half, but the sword continued to move downward, splitting the chest and abdomen, until it cut the huge body in half. At the last second, the disaster cannon made a sound similar to an air raid alarm. The huge body suddenly disintegrated into black smoke, and was blown away by the wind. Another cry, but it was Hulk who fell from the air, and fell face first to the ground. He was originally taking risks in the belly of the disaster cannon, but cannon was destroyed by Link in an instant, and Hulk floated in the air for a while and fell down. Link held the dragon scale greatsword and panted, trying to raise his hand, patted the sword of the dragon scale greatsword, and smiled. We won. A joyful dragon roar came from his heart, and then like a stone falling into an empty valley, there was an echo, and there was no other movement. Link's heart was inevitably gloomy. Victory. Link won. We won. The Earth won. The reporter shouted wildly. He loved this job so much. It was so exciting. Watching Link take risks and fight, and finally win with all his might, it was as if he had also experienced a great war. The reporter celebrated wildly, tearing his fragile vocal cords, which was extremely harsh. But at this moment, no one in front of the TV cared about his voice, whether it disturbed them, because everyone was cheering for this great victory. At this moment, this is the day when the decibels produced by humans in the world are the highest. The whole world is cheering. Tony also cheered and stretched out his hands to run towards Link. Jarvis' voice came, "Sir, the Arbiter's sword has returned to normal." Haha. Really? Jarvis, you are so funny. Tony laughed. What do we need these for? You activate the decomposition device on the Arbiter's sword, let the Iron Men fly into the sky, and blow up fireworks. Celebrate, Link. Hulk rubbed his head, and his body gradually shrank, and turned into Banner. Banner shook his head, feeling confused in his mind, and then saw Link, who was about to fall to the ground softly, and wanted to help him. But the two princesses still ran over with laughter. Princess Washang also rarely stopped, being reserved and smiled just like Link. Seeing the two girls running over, and his pants couldn't be held up, so Banner staggered, and ran to find his pants. The two girls supported Link. Zelda couldn't help but kiss Link in public. Link only felt a warm and soft touch on his cheek, which disappeared immediately. Zelda smiled and said, "You won, Link." Princess Washang looked at Zelda in panic, thinking, should I show my appreciation? So she clumsily reached over her cleaned white face and gently touched Link's forehead with her cherry-like lips. He said softly, "You are my hero." Rogers and others came over. Natasha looked at the sweet three people and couldn't help laughing. "We came over, but apart from destroying a fighter plane, it seems that we didn't help much." Rogers said, "At least the Hulk was brought here." Hawkeye folded his arms and raised his eyebrows. "Well, not bad. At least we got to watch a great battle up close." Tony came over carrying Rode and smiled. "I think, apart from Link, my contribution can be ranked first." Natasha smiled. "Have you forgotten Banner?" Tony curled his lips. "Oh, can Banner be like me?" He snapped his fingers to the sky. "Jarvis, my fireworks." Bang, 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 bang. Link and Zelda looked up and watched the shining fireworks bloom in the gradually clearing sky. Chapter 175 New Life. Several people looked at the fire bursting in the sky. Hawkeye smiled helplessly and said, "It's hot enough here. There's no need to increase the temperature further." Natasha gathered her hair and said, "I think it's good. The most luxurious fireworks in history." Banner found his pants from somewhere and ran over with his upper body naked, shouting, "Everyone, can anyone lend me a piece of clothing?" Roger smiled and took off his leather jacket and handed it to Banner. Tony put his hands on his hips and looked around, saying, "It's really good." Pepper has already started to buy up New York real estate. Don't look at the destruction here. In less than 2 years, it will be planned by the Stark Group into a prosperous corner of New York. I will name this area the Stark District. Roger said, "Then I hope the housing prices can be cheaper, at least cheaper than the current Brooklyn district." Link didn't even have the strength to stand up. The dragon scale sword he was leaning on had cooled down. It was the last relic of the All-One. Thinking of this, Link felt a little sad. He was about to take the dragon scale greatsword away, but a wave came from the sword, first strong, then weaker, as if urging Link to do something. Thinking of the will left by All-One in his mind, Link knew that the dragon scale greatsword was hinting at something. Link asked Princess Washang to help him pick up the dragon scale greatsword and take it to find the place where the dragon scale greatsword waved more strongly. Seeing that Link was still looking for something even in such a tired state, everyone felt strange, but also helped Link to look everywhere. Link was supported by Zelda and followed the wave on the dragon scale greatsword to the place where All-One fell just now. Hawkeye shouted first, "Link, there is a red ball there. It seems to be an egg. Take good care of my child." Link's eyes lit up. Could it be the offspring of All-One? Take me there. There are many unsolved mysteries in the Hyrule continent, such as the lifespan and gender of the three-headed dragon. Since an egg was left behind, All-One is probably a female dragon. Link hurried to the egg, and Zelda suddenly said, "It's so hot ahead, let's not go over there." Although they were a little afraid of the egg from another world, Natasha and Hawkeye rushed over to check it out of professional habit. But they didn't walk a few steps before they were driven back by a wave of heat. Tony stood far away and said, "You are so healthy that you dare to walk such a long distance. I can feel the temperature of 40 degrees when I stay here." Link was very confused. "Where is it hot?" Natasha was a little dry in the mouth. I'm afraid it's the heat from the strange thing. That seems to be an egg. Link, use your skills to help us cool down. Link then released cold air. Zelda said, it's still so hot. But Link looked at everyone. Their bodies were covered with a layer of light white frost. Obviously they were frozen to death. But they didn't realize it at all and still felt very cold. Link was afraid that if he released cold air again, he would freeze them, so he pulled it. But whether Link released the cold air or not, Zelda and the others could not feel the temperature change, and it was still unbearably hot. This shows that the heat felt by Zelda, Rogers and the others did not come from the outside world, but from their hearts. Rogers said, I'm afraid that egg, except Link, does not intend to let anyone get close. Zelda whispered, be careful. Then she let go of Link, and the Washan princess also handed over the weapon. Everyone retreated, and only Link was left struggling to move forward. Link leaned on the dragon scale sword, and came to the side of the egg. Nearby was the huge crack created by the battle between the two giant beasts. This dragon egg, which looked like a red agate, was 40 centimeters in diameter, and was shaking violently and uncomfortably. It seemed to be able to sense Link's arrival and shook more violently. The dragon egg emitted a faint light, shining on the eggshell, so you can clearly see a little guy inside, swimming uncomfortably. For some reason, the light on the dragon egg became dimmer as Link approached. Link put the dragon scale sword back into the weapon space, tapped the eggshell gently, and said, little guy. The baby dragon in the dragon egg suddenly stopped swimming, and obediently stuck to the eggshell facing Link. But for a moment, Link didn't know what to do. Should he break the eggshell, and take out the little dragon, or wait for the little dragon to hatch slowly? Although separated by a thick eggshell, Link could also feel the closeness from the little life in the shell. The little dragon's mother followed Link to fight, and died tragically in the end. This experience made Link full of responsibility, that is, to protect the little life in this dragon egg. But he is a human being, and no human in the world has ever bred a dragon egg. So Link was at a loss. But at this moment, cracks appeared on the red eggshell, and then like broken explosion-proof glass, they spread everywhere densely. It exploded into a pool of fragments, and the sticky liquid inside flowed out. A tender little dragon, like a red pudding, landed on Link's legs. It was sticky all over, and its wet claws were scratching Link's legs, but they hadn't become sharp yet. The little dragon opened its slender mouth, like a little lizard, and chirped sharply. Link picked up the little dragon, and it seemed to feel a little cold. The little dragon was trembling slightly. It tried several times to open its eyes, but failed. Bobo's eyelids were trembling, and he opened his mouth and chirped twice. Link asked softly, do you want to eat? According to the description in the novel, Link picked up a small eggshell and fed it to the little dragon. But although the little dragon held the eggshell obediently and tried to swallow it, it was always unsuccessful and spit it aside in disgust. Obviously, the little dragon didn't like eggshells very much. Link didn't know what to feed the little dragon for a while. The little dragon's red and tender body became increasingly dim, as if it was about to die. Even dragons, as newborn infants, are very fragile. Link turned around and shouted, does any one of you bring any food? Everyone shook their heads. Link was in distress for a moment. The little dragon kept calling out weakly, his voice getting weaker and weaker. Having just broken the shell, the little dragon urgently needed nutrition, otherwise it would die soon. This brought great fear to Link. The little dragon's mother, Oolong, fought with Link, and died tragically in the end. Could it be that Link couldn't even save her child? The little dragon cried, and Link picked up the little dragon, and put his face against the little dragon's. At this moment, he seemed particularly powerless. His eyes, involuntarily, looked at the big crack. A large amount of magma had been poured into it, emitting terrible heat. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.